Beneath deserts, jungles, and forgotten seas lie the bones of civilizations erased not by time but by something older. Before history, before myth, there were structures, built with purpose, abandoned with silence, and now, re-emerging like ghosts with no names. From submerged villages to sky-aligned tombs, these 53 sites whisper the same impossible truth. The flood didn't end the world it buried its evidence. You won't find these in textbooks, but you'll feel them, because once you see them, you can't unsee what the water tried to hide. Welcome to 53 Uncovered Pre-Flood Structures. Arkaim, Russia. In the middle of the southern Ural steppe, where grassland turns to dust and wind whistles across an unbroken horizon, lies a strange circular scar on the Eartha Bronze Age city called Arkaim. To the untrained eye, it looks like a forgotten ruin, the accidental aftermath of time and weather. But from above, it's unmistakable, a perfectly concentric settlement of rings within rings, like the fingerprints of some forgotten architect, etched directly into the land. It was only discovered in 1987, almost by accident, just days before Soviet engineers were going to flood the entire valley for a reservoir project. And what a strange thing to stumble across. Streets laid in spirals, uniform housing plots arranged with geometric obsession, and a central square where something not a church, not a market, not anything that modern historians can quite definience stood. A city without a clear function, a civilization without a known name. They say Arkaim is Russia's Stonehenge, but the comparison is lazy. Stonehenge never had plumbing, Arkaim did. It had sophisticated drainage systems, double defensive walls, and metallurgy workshops. Whoever lived here, roughly 4,000 years ago, wasn't dabbling in mysticism under moonlight. They were engineers, astronomers, possibly priests, possibly something worse. And it's not just the structure, it's the layout. Arkaim is aligned to major celestial events with unsettling precision. The solstices, equinoxes, lunar extremes all accounted for. You could track the heavens from inside your mud brick home like it was a cosmic observatory. And then there's the bigger question. Why the circle? Why live like a spiral-bound cult in the middle of nowhere? It wasn't defensible. It wasn't particularly fertile. And it wasn't connected to any major trade routes. But someone, or something, thought this place mattered. Arkaim doesn't fit neatly into the linear timeline of human development. Its sophistication is too advanced. Its decline too abrupt. Some researchers connect it to the Santashta culture, others to the mythical Aryans described in Vedic texts. New Age circles have dubbed it an energy vortex. Russian nationalists have claimed it as the cradle of the Slavic soul, and yet no one really knows who built it, or why they vanished. There are no epic tales, no surviving script, no real closure. Just those rings. Like ripples from a stone dropped into time itself, Arkaim sits silent observing the heavens long after its people stopped breathing. And just beyond its southern curve, buried beneath thousands of years of dust, is another mystery. A ruin that shouldn't exist, sitting beneath temples that shouldn't be that old. And yet, they are. Khajuraho's pre-Hindu structures, India. Beneath the world-famous erotic temples of Khajuraho where gods copulate under stone skies and celestial dancers freeze mid-gesture there, lies something far older, something quieter. Something the tourists never see. These medieval Hindu and Jain temples, often dated to around the 9th to 11th centuries CE, are merely the visible tip of an architectural iceberg. Underneath the ornamented granite facades, beneath the intricate carvings of gods, apsaras, and impossible postures, are foundations that predate the temples themselves by how much no one can agree on. Archaeologists, in their trademark caution, call them substructures. But to those who've looked too closely, there's something else. entirely relics of a civilization that existed before Hinduism took architectural form, perhaps before language did. We're talking about massive stone blocks positioned with impossible precision, post holes cut into bedrock that seem to align with solstices, and underground chambers whose original purpose isn't just unknown needs aggressively ambiguous. Local legends whisper that the site is much older than the official narrative allows. Some say the temples were built atop ancient shrines that predate the Vedas. Others claim they were designed to honor even older earth spirits, the kind that don't show up in scripture, but do show up in nightmares. In the local Bundelkhand dialect, there are stories passed down orally of a time when the gods had no names and walked among the mud. Interpret that how you will. And then there's the geometry. Modern architects studying the temple layout have noted a peculiar pattern, a radial alignment of structures that mimics celestial movement, but also seems to suggest a kind of terrestrial Mapinga geoglyph-like design, now fragmented, perhaps once stretching far beyond Khajuraho itself. If these underlying structures are indeed Neolithic or Chalcolithic in origin, that would mean the area was not only occupied thousands of years before the temples were built, but intentionally marked for cosmic or geomantic purposes. So why layer a famously sensual temple complex over something so somber and primeval? Was it a deliberate act of spiritual overriding new gods conquering the old? Or was it a form of architectural camouflage, using sacred spectacle to hide something more dangerous underneath? These are questions that archaeologists don't get funding to ask. But the locals, the guides who've never read a peer-reviewed journal, seem to understand instinctively. They point to the ground, not the temple. They tell you to listen at dusk, not to pray. And just when you think you've reached the bottom of the mystery, you realize the foundation you're standing on perfectly cut, worn smooth by time faces west, toward Africa, toward the coast, toward a land where the stones rise in circles and the names of the dead are carved into silence. The stone circles of Senegambia, Senegal, Gambia. At first glance, they look like the scattered vertebrae of a god, hundreds of thick stone pillars rising from the red earth, sun-blasted and motionless, circling nothing, no temples, no thrones, no explanations, just ring after ring of standing stones spread across Senegal and the Gambia, so abundant that even UNESCO had to lump them together under one name, the Stone Circles of Senegambia. It sounds tidy, but it isn't. There are over 1,000 of them. Some are neat and symmetrical, others chaotic and jagged. Some enclose tumuli burial mounds that have yielded iron tools, human remains, and the occasional ornamental artifact. But no writing, no clear cultural fingerprints. Just carefully arranged monuments left by people who have somehow left nothing else behind, which, of course, is suspicious in and of itself. These aren't small stones either. Some weigh several tons. And yet they were quarried, carved, and arranged by pre-industrial hands with no wheels, no pulleys, no known beasts of burden. Just sheer will and a vision we still haven't cracked. The material? Laterididense, iron-rich rock that turns to rust when weathered, giving the whole landscape an eerie, blood-colored hue. Imagine walking through a necropolis built from coagulated time. That's the vibe. Mainstream archaeology suggests they were built between the 3rd century BCE and 16th century CE, which is another way of saying, we're not sure, but let's give ourselves a lot of room to guess. Oral histories from the region point to kingdoms, long gone Serer, Jola, Fulanabut. None claim to have built the circles. Most say they were already there. Some say they're doorways. Others, tombs. A few whisper about the stones as beings watchers, sentinels who occasionally remember what they once were. The arrangement of the circles isn't random. Many align with cardinal directions. Some suggest solar and lunar tracking. Others appear to mirror constellations. And while the science tiptoes around these facts, The pattern is hard to ignore. Someone wanted to mark time here. Someone who understood cycles, not just agricultural or astronomical ones, but something deeper. Something stranger, perhaps death itself. To date, no one has reconstructed the full purpose of these sites, and perhaps that's the point. Maybe they weren't built to be understood by anyone but the dead. Maybe the circles aren't messages, but locks, ritual safes concealing whatever secrets were too dangerous to carry forward. And yet, thousands of miles away, in a forest of cork oaks and fog, another circle rises, older than Stonehenge, quieter, but no less unsettling in its symmetry. A ring of stones in Portugal, waiting like teeth for something to return. Cromlech of the Almendres, Portugal. It stands where the fog doesn't lift. In a cork oak grove near Évora, Portugal, a congregation of stones huddles in silence, some upright, some leaning, others half swallowed by the earth. They call it the cromlech of the Almendres, which is a sanitized way of saying, we found a bunch of megaliths older than Stonehenge, arranged with unsettling precision, and we have no idea why. There are over 90 stones here, rounded, weathered, quietly brooding. They form concentric rings and ellipses, as if sketching out the memory of a machine no one knows how to operate anymore. They aren't just tossed there each. One was dragged, shaped, and planted like a deliberate thought. Some are taller than a man. Some barely reach your knees. But every single one is aligned to something. The sky, most likely, or maybe time, or maybe something deeper, more circular. Dating suggests the site began around 6,000 BCE, placing it squarely in the Neolithic. That means Almendres was functional before writing, before metal tools, before Egypt had pyramids, before myths were even written down. This was a place of gathering, of watching, of ritual. Or so we assume, because the site speaks in symbols, not stories. A few of the stones bear carvings, wavy lines, circles within circles, dim impressions like fingerprints left by an extinct culture. Some say these marks are solar glyphs, others call them prayers or warnings. The cromlech wasn't discovered until the 1960s, which is its own kind of miracle. For thousands of years, it sat half forgotten under forest brush and rural farmland, ignored by modern eyes. And maybe that was the point. Maybe it wasn't supposed to be remembered. Because the moment it re-entered the human narrative, people began trying to explain it, fit it, claim it. A Neolithic calendar. A fertility site, a proto-observatory, a druidic prototype which would be impressive, since the Druids wouldn't exist for another 4,000 years. But the truth resists compression. The cromlech isn't about what we can measure. It's about what we can't. It's not just that the stones point to solstices. It's that they wait for them. Every year, every cycle, as if keeping time not for us, but for something else that once stood among them and may again. And if the idea of ancient Europe harboring secret astronomers with perfect geometric intuition rattles you, consider this. Halfway across the Urals, under peat and shadow, they found a totem. 10,000 years old, wooden, covered in code, and somehow still staring. Shigir idol, Russia. It came out of the muck like a resurrection. Pulled from the black ooze of a peat bog in the Sverdlovsk region, the Shigir idol lay buried for over 10,000 years, twice as old as the Egyptian pyramids, older than any known writing, older than agriculture in most of the world. It is a god made of larch wood, carved with sharp precision, still bearing the scent of rot and time. It is not a structure, not exactly, but what it implies about prehistoric thought is more architectural than stone and mortar. The idol stands over 5 meters tall in its original form, though some of it is now lost. Carved on all sides with faces, zigzags, lozenges, and lines that look less like ornament and more like encryption, it is the oldest known wooden sculpture on Earth. And yet, it looks modern, stylized, deliberate. like the instructions for something that no longer exists, something that walked alongside the ancient hunter-gatherers and perhaps whispered geometry into their sleep. Its age shocked researchers. At first, they thought it might be 2,000 years old, then 5,000, then 7,000. Radiocarbon dating eventually pushed the date back to roughly 9,600 BCE, a moment in time that shouldn't contain this level of complexity. According to mainstream history, the people of that era were still struggling with survival, barely out of caves. Yet here stands a totem that speaks of cosmology, of mythic cycles, of structure. The carvings resemble other ancient symbols from far-flung places, meander patterns found in later Neolithic temples, humanoid figures echoed in petroglyphs thousands of miles away. It's almost as if the Shigir idol is not an isolated artifact, but a page torn from a vast forgotten book, a book once read aloud by people who remembered something we do not. And then there's its burial. It was deliberately placed in the boga method of preservation, possibly ritual. It wasn't lost. It was hidden, protected. Like someone knew the world would lose the language to understand it and wanted to delay the moment of its reappearance. The idol wasn't just stored, it was sealed. What culture built it? No name survives. No city, no temple, no grave. Only this looming wooden witness. The kind of thing you don't build unless you have something to say to the stars or to whatever came before them. And just south, across the dunes of a once verdant Sahara, others were building too. Not idols, but arteries. Vast, buried veins of water, carved by hands, long vanished. An underground map of a desert that was never supposed to be one. The Foggara, Sahara, North Africa. Beneath the dead heat of the Sahara, under dunes that shift like slow avalanches, lie ancient veins carved into stone. They're called foggara subterranean irrigation systems that snake invisibly beneath some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. From above, there's nothing. Just the occasional line of collapsed holes, like a spine poking through sand. But dig, and you find a forgotten technology so advanced it feels like science fiction. A quiet, invisible architecture built to pull water from the bones of the desert. A foggara isn't just a well. It's a system. A sloping tunnel bored horizontally into the base of a slope or a dry wadi, tapping into hidden aquifers. Along the tunnel, vertical shafts rise to the surface like chimneys, providing both air and access for maintenance. The gradient is subtle, engineered with surgical precision to keep water moving gently, persistently, without the aid of pumps, electricity, or even gravity in the traditional sense. And no one knows who first built them. They've been used for thousands of years. The Tuareg claim they inherited them. The Berbers say the same. The Romans mentioned similar systems, but never claimed to have invented them. Some archaeologists date the oldest foggara networks back at least 3,000 years, but others argue they may be even older, predating formal dynastic Egypt, reaching into the murk of prehistory, where names dissolve and only function remains. What kind of people design a water system you can't see? One that requires no supervision, no constant labor, just slow, perpetual yield? People who understood scarcity not as a crisis, but as a constant. People who weren't experimenting with engineering, they had already mastered it. And here's the strangest part. These systems don't just appear in North Africa. Identical techniques show up in Iran, Afghanistan, and even parts of China. Known elsewhere as qanats, khares, or falaj, the blueprints echo across continents. As if someone passed this knowledge along trade routes that didn't officially exist, or perhaps across civilizations that didn't leave written words, only flowing water and disappearing footsteps. What does it mean when our oldest technologies are also our quietest? When the architecture of survival is carved not upward into the sky, but downward into darkness? And somewhere in Anatolia, those same instincts took a harder edge. Not irrigation this time, but entombment. Not water tunnels, but chambers carved into rock cliffs be a people so ancient, even their graves look surprised to be remembered. The rock-cut tombs of Amasya, Turkey, clinging to the cliffs above the sleepy Turkish town of Amasya, are the staring mouths of the dead. Carved directly into the limestone face like windows into another dimension, these are the rock-cut tombs, a row of yawning cavities said to belong to kings, though no thrones remain. At night, the tombs catch moonlight like old eyes. During the day, they vanish into shadow. And all the while, they ask the same silent question: who carved us, and why so high? Mainstream history credits these tombs to the Pontic kings, Hellenistic rulers, who once controlled this narrow valley along the Yeşilırmak River. But the tombs don't entirely fit the Pontic aesthetic. They seem too severe, too blank, too old. Some archaeologists have suggested that the Pontic dynasty simply reused what was already there. That they inherited the mountain graves the same way monarchs inherit crowns without asking where they really came from. Because the thing is, the deeper you look into the tombs, the stranger they become. Some chambers go far beyond what ceremonial function would require: deep recesses, multiple levels, false doors. Others contain niches with no clear purpose, alcoves carved in silence, no inscriptions, no reliefs, just raw stone carved with unnerving precision. Some even echo when you stand inside them, like the rock is remembering a voice you're not supposed to hear. The local legends don't help. Villagers speak of jinn that live in the cliffs, of voices in the rock, of ancient kings whose spirits never left, because they never really died. And down below, in the valley, the modern town carries on its streetlights blinking dumbly beneath the haunted balconies of a forgotten civilization. Tourists come, take pictures, leave. None of them climb into the tombs. Not really. Not the deep ones. There are older graves in Anatolia, certainly, and yet something about Amasya refuses categorization. The tombs are transitional. They sit somewhere between prehistory and history, between symbolic burial and practical death, too elaborate for simple memorials, too stark for royal vanity. And then there's their location high above the city, where nothing could ever be built. Was it meant to be a deterrent, a display, or perhaps a vantage point for the dead to observe the living? If so, they aren't alone. Just beyond the Caucasus, nestled in green and stone, are chambers stranger still. Hundreds, maybe thousands. Not in cliffs but under moss and soil. Each doorway sealed, each passage leading nowhere but back into the mouth of a culture that left only puzzles behind. The dolmens of the Caucasus, Russia, Georgia. Dotting the green slopes of the western Caucasus like ancient blisters on the skin of the earth, the dolmens lie half swallowed by time. Stone boxes with stone lids, each one fitted with an eerie, perfectly round entrance hole. Some are nestled into forest clearings, others buried up to their roofs by earth and ivy, as though the land is trying to forget they ever existed. There are thousands of them. And no one, not archaeologists, not local historians, not even the legends can fully explain who built them or why. The dolmens range in size from small coffins to stone huts you can crawl into if you dare. Their construction defies the assumed technological capabilities of the time, usually estimated around the 3rd to 2nd millennia BCE. Enormous stone slabs, sometimes weighing several tons, are cut with surprising accuracy and assembled without mortar. The precision is surgical. You couldn't fit a blade between some of the joints. And then there's the hole, always the hole, perfectly circular, usually centered, sometimes plugged with a stone disc like the lid to a cosmic jar. Function? That depends on who you ask. Mainstream theories suggest burial sites, but no consistent remains have been found. In many cases, the dolmens are empty, or worse, disturbed in antiquity by unknown hands. Some scholars propose ritual chambers, perhaps aligned with celestial events, while others suspect habitation, though the claustrophobic design makes that difficult to imagine unless the inhabitants were exceedingly short or not human at all. But it's not just the structure, it's the spread. These dolmens are concentrated in a specific region, but similar constructions echo across distant lands: France, Korea, India. The design travels. And yet, there's no known cultural thread connecting them, no shared language, no trade links robust enough to justify such a coherent architectural meme. Just a repeated impulse to build a stone room with a round hole into the unknown. Locals speak of giants, of forest spirits, of the Narts, mythical beings said to have once ruled the mountains with wisdom and fire. Others say the dolmens are time machines, or tombs that haven't opened yet. There's even a fringe theory that they were designed as womb portals for rebirth, not death. And perhaps that's what ties them to the next anomaly. Far south, across the Sahel, in a land older than most maps dare remember, another series of stone circles emerges, quietly aligned, mostly unexcavated, and entirely disobedient to the histories we've chosen to believe. The stone circles of Mali. In the dry belly of West Africa, where the landscape wavers between dust and silence, the stone circles of Mali sit like forgotten punctuation marks in a sentence no one remembers how to read. Scattered across the Sahel, especially in regions neighboring the more famous Senegambian formations, these rings of upright stones appear and disappear across the landscape, barely rising above the shrubs. Others, standing tall like guards who never received the order to stand down. They are less mapped, less studied, less funded, but not less strange. Some archaeologists have lumped these sites in with their better-known cousins to the west, but the truth is, they differ, subtly, uncomfortably. Their patterns are more irregular, their stone shapes more jagged, their alignments slightly off, as though built from memory rather than plan. Like imitation sexcept older, or descendant sexcept smarter. In some cases, the stones are decorated with abstract markings, weathered into ambiguity, a few bare tool marks that suggest metallurgical experimentation, or maybe just obsession. Very few of these sites have been properly excavated. Those that have tend to produce more questions than answers, scattered human remains, often buried in fetal position. Fragments of ceramics that don't match known cultural patterns, strange artifacts made from non-local stone. Nothing that says civilization in the way modern anthropology prefers. No city plans, no writing, no monumental statues, just repetition, endless repetition. Circles within circles, sometimes paired with nearby burial mounds, sometimes left orphaned, as if the original purpose had already been forgotten by the builders themselves. Local oral histories have all but gone silent on the matter. Some villages call them devil's rings. Others say they were used by ancestors so ancient that even the spirits won't name them. A few whisper that they are gates, not metaphors, literal gates, into the past, into the ground, into somewhere else. Their alignment with celestial events is rougher than their northern counterparts, but still suggestive. Enough to hint that the sky was being watched, even here, even then. And perhaps the most unnerving detail, some of these circles line up, across vast distances, with others in Ethiopia and Sudan, a network or coincidence, a lost culture or a shared instinct? Whatever the answer, the pattern moves east, toward Tiya, a field of standing stones not far from Addis Ababa, each carved with symbols no one has decoded, each arranged like a frozen language written in shadow, waiting. The Tiya stelae, Ethiopia. Scattered across the Ethiopian highlands like exclamation points of an extinct grammar, the Tiya stelae rise from the soil with a kind of haunted certainty. Over 160 standing stones dot the landscape in and around the village of Tiya, most less than 2 meters tall, all of them marked cut, inscribed, and deliberately placed in arrangements that no one has fully deciphered. They're old, possibly thousands of years old. But how old? That's where the guessing starts, and the explanations go to die. Some stelae bear simple geometric shaped circles, chevrons, swords. Others are more complex, etched with abstract symbols that seem both repetitive and unique, as if part of a visual language spoken only once, long ago, by people whose names have been swallowed by the very soil they shaped. The carvings are worn but unmistakable, stubborn against erosion. They weren't just decorations, they were messages. The problem is, we no longer speak the dialect of stone. The common theory is that these are grave markers, and yes, some stelae are associated with burials, but not all, and not consistently. Some mark no tombs, some are arranged in rows with no bones beneath them. Others form patterns that suggest mapping, orientation, or ritual alignment. A few even appear to face each other, like silent participants in a ceremony that never ends. No tools from the site have revealed a clear builder. No texts accompany the stones, just symbols carved with care into granite too hard to yield easily. These were not idle monuments. Someone bled to make them. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Some of the symbols, particularly the sword motif, appear not only in Tiya, but in other sites across southern Ethiopia. Sites that remain unexcavated, undocumented, and in some cases, unacknowledged. Which raises the real possibility that Tiya is not an isolated enigma, but one node in a vast, prehistoric network of stelae scattered across the Horn of Africa, pointing to a civilization, yes. A civilization that left almost no other trace. No cities, no fortresses, just stones that talk to the sky. The people of the region still tell stories. They say these were the graves of warriors, or heroes, or cursed kings, or fallen stars. They say not to touch them after dark. They say the symbols move, but only if you're not looking. And to the east, on an island so remote it was once thought to drift, the stones align again, this time with the ocean, this time with silence. The statues may get the fame, but the real story is buried beneath their feet, in the ahu, in the bones, in the alignments that should not be so precise. The stone alignments of Rapa Nui, Easter Island. Out on a volcanic speck in the Pacific, so far from anywhere, it may as well be floating stand the moai of Rapa Nui, staring inland with blank, elongated faces and heavy brows carved in eternal disapproval. But the story of Easter Island is not just about the statues. Beneath the iconic heads and the tourist mythology, scattered across the wind-scoured terrain, lie stone alignments and platform sahooth that whisper a stranger, quieter mystery. The ahu are ceremonial platforms. That's what the textbooks say. But the more you look at them, their placement, their geometry, their relationships to each other, the less they seem like platforms, and the more they resemble something else. Markers? Antennae? Blueprints? Many are built from cyclopean stonework, fit so tightly that the joints disappear. Others are laid out in orientations that sync with lunar standstills, solar solstices, or positions of stars that are only visible from the southern hemisphere and only during very specific epochs. A handful align with the cardinal directions, which is peculiar given that Easter Island has no natural compass points, just ocean in every direction. Some of these ahu are older than the moai that stand atop them. Some have no moai at all. They stretch inland, forgotten, half buried in grass and volcanic debris, as if whatever purpose they served died long before the statues were ever imagined. And that raises an awkward question. Were the moai the original feature of Rapa Nui? Or were they latecomers' decorations for a sacred landscape whose true significance lies underground? There are theories, of course. The ahu marked ancestral burial grounds. They were social gathering points. They were prestige projects. All plausible, all incomplete. Because no theory quite explains why so many of the platforms align with distant points on the island, or why some of them seem to map the sky in stone. And then there's the most unsettling part. Several alignments trace out distances that, when extended, point toward other megalithic sites across the globe. Nazca, Tiwanaku, even distant Mohenjo-Daro. Coincidence? Maybe. But the precision is unnerving. Rapa Nui is an island where memory runs deep and refuses to be organized. Oral traditions suggest the Ahu were built with the help of mana-spiritual energy that could move mountains. Maybe that's metaphor. Maybe it isn't. But just inland from these mysterious alignments, buried beneath dense vegetation and mostly ignored, are structures, even stranger, foundations with no obvious purpose, rectangular outlines in volcanic rock. Domestic, perhaps, but belonging to no known culture, as if someone lived here long before the Rapa Nui ever carved a face. The Great Zimbabwe Satellite Sites. Zimbabwe, Mozambique. Great Zimbabwe gets the headline stone towers, walled enclosures, and a name so heavy with symbolic weight that entire colonial narratives were built to deny it. But scattered across the valleys and highlands of southern Zimbabwe and into northern Mozambique are its quieter shadows. Satellite stone ruins that share its architecture, echo its layout but resist its fame. And these lesser-known structures may be even older, more cryptic, and less understood than the grand complex they orbit like forgotten moons. They appear where no city should be. Remote ridges, riverbanks, hilltops with no strategic value. Circular enclosures made of dry stacked granite, sometimes just a single ring, sometimes in clusters. The stones are carefully fitted, but without mortar, forming walls that curve like the flow of thought. Many of these ruins mirror the iconic elliptical style of Great Zimbabwe, but with subtle deviations, if built from the same language, but different dialects. There are towers with no entrance, walls with no surrounding habitation, passageways that go nowhere, like a ritual space for a forgotten ritual. Archaeologists have cataloged hundreds of these satellite sites. Some are small, others sprawling. Most remain unexcavated. Their purpose is guessed, maybe trading posts, maybe regional chiefdoms, maybe religious centers, but the distribution defies simple explanation. They're not on trade routes, they're not resource hubs, and their uniformity suggests coordination, either a shared blueprint or a centralized culture whose reach far exceeded our assumptions. The builders left no written records. Oral traditions speak of a vast kingdom ruled by stone, but the timelines blur. Some say these sites were inhabited before Great Zimbabwe rose. Others insist they were part of it, outposts of a once unified network. Still others claim they were sacred, built by an ancient people unrelated to the Shona, designed for celestial observation or communication with the ancestors. Their alignment with astronomical phenomena is debated but not dismissed. A few of the enclosures do, suspiciously, point towards solstice sunrises or lunar extremes. And then there's the mystery of abandonment. The sites weren't destroyed, they were left, quietly, gradually, as if the people simply walked away from the stone, leaving no tools, no signs of struggle, not even bones, just silence and granite. And to the north, in a colder sea whipped by wind, that same silence lingers among islands the map barely mentions. There, the stones also stand, alone, watching, as if some ancient instinct made its way to the far reaches of Scotland and stayed. The standing stones of Orkney's outer islands, Scotland, beyond the well-documented henges and causeways of mainland Orkney's Stoic Neolithic celebrities like the Ring of Brodgar and the stones of Stennesly smaller, lonelier sentinels scattered across the archipelago's outer islands. On Ruse, Sande, Ide, Hoy, and a handful of barely inhabited isles, these standing stones rise from bog and heath, like misplaced punctuation single pillars, weather-worn and stubborn, sometimes tilted, sometimes upright, always out of place. No visitor center, no velvet rope, just a megalith stuck in the middle of nowhere, staring at sheep. They are often overlooked because they don't come with drama. No dramatic rings, no grand alignments, no obvious ceremonial flair. But look closer, and something more unsettling begins to take shape. These outer stones are part of a vast, decentralized networkage, isolated, yet somehow connected. Many sit near prehistoric burial cairns or hidden mounds, as though playing sentinel to the dead. Others align with the cardinal points or with geographic features that no longer exist, ancient shorelines now swallowed by the North Sea. The stones themselves vary in shape and size. Some are squat and broad, others tall and blade-like, like petrified guardians. Almost all are uncarved except for the landscape around them. Archaeologists have noted that many of these stones are set in deliberately flattened platforms, subtle depressions, or causeways that only reveal their shape from above. From the ground, it's stone and field. From the air, it's intent. The most tantalizing theory suggests these stones once formed a constellation of land-based Markersa prehistoric GPS system, if you like. Not for navigation in the modern sense, but for ritual movement. Processions, pilgrimage routes, or maybe even migration patterns now lost to flooding and time. Some researchers propose they marked the turning points of the sun across the year. Others think they formed a calendar. The locals? They say the stones choose where they want to stand, and once they've chosen, they don't move, ever. The wind in Orkney has a memory. It whispers around the stones like it knows what they're for. And the stones don't talk back, but they don't deny it either. They just remain, quietly bearing witness to centuries of erasure, retreat, and polite forgetting. And farther south, where the Sahara once bloomed with grass and game, no standing stones mark the past, but they didn't need to. The ancestors there etched their memory into walls, not in names, in visions. Visions of beasts that no longer walk, and of people who may never have been fully human. The rock art shelters of the Sahara, Algeria, Libya, where the Sahara now sprawls in a dry, breathless hush, there was once a green world. Lakes, herds, thunderstorms, and people. People who, thousands of years ago, crept into caves and rock shelters and left behind images so vivid, so alien, that even now, with all our tools and models and carbon dates, we still don't quite know what we're looking at. In the highlands of Tassili Niger and the sandstone outcrops of the Libyan Caucasus, the rock art shelters stare back at us not as primitive doodles, but as curated, deliberate galleries of another consciousness. The art spans millennia. It begins with herds of antelope and cattle, humans with bows, swimmers in what is now barren sand. But then it shifts. The figures become elongated. Their heads swell. Their limbs extend in unnatural proportions. Some float. Some wear strange helmets or masks or something else. The so-called roundhead figures, with their bulbous skulls and gestureless arms, dominate entire cliff walls. They tower over human-sized carvings like absent gods or distant ancestors. They weren't painted in haste. Many of these images are layered, revisited, edited, revered. Pigments were mixed with milk and blood and plant ash to endure thousands of sunrises, and endure they did. What crumbles is the narrative. Who made them? A pastoralist culture, yes, but which one? Some art predates known Saharan occupation, others linger into Proto-Berber traditions, but none of them explain the faces, or lack thereof. Many of the humanoid figures are faceless, deliberately so, as though identity was either forbidden or irrelevant. There are no written records, just depictions. But depictions of what? Shamans in trance? Astral visitors? Myths? Memories? Misunderstood metaphors? No answer survives. Only theory, and all of them feel too small. The shelters themselves are carefully chosen, not random walls, natural amphitheaters, acoustically resonant hollows, places where voice and wind echo unnaturally. Some are high up, nearly inaccessible, as if the act of reaching them was part of the ritual. And in this lies the clue. These were not doodles, they were invocations, not decorations, declarations. A way of capturing something that could not be housed in language. And as the desert swallowed the lakes and scattered its people, the art remained, watching, remembering. To the northeast, where the Nile was once young and unruled, the memory of structure begins again not in temples or tombs, but in villages without names. Settlements that sprouted before the first dynasty, and somehow before even the idea of kings. The pre-dynastic Egyptian settlements, Egypt, before the pyramids clawed at the sky and before the pharaohs invented eternity, there were villages, quiet ones, scattered along the banks of a younger, hungrier Nile. Places like Merimde Beni Salama, Nakada, and Badari, where people lived and died and left behind no monuments, just patterns. Pottery, bone tools, mud brick walls long since collapsed into anonymity. These are Egypt's forgotten prequel chapters. Pre-dynastic settlements, where the script of kingship had not yet been written, but something older, more essential was already at work. These settlements were not primitive camps. They were organized, structured, intentional, rectangular houses, often clustered around courtyards, granaries, specialized workshops. Communal spaces that suggest more than survival, they suggest planning, memory, a shared language of space and repetition that predates writing, but not meaning. In some cases, the village layouts mirror patterns seen later in temples, as if the sacred geometry of the gods began with household chores. And then there's the pottery black-topped red ware, ripple-burnished, sometimes painted with boats, animals, and abstract symbols. Not decorations, messages, or perhaps memories. Bound in graves, placed with care beside the dead, these ceramics whisper of a cosmology without gods yet thick with significance. Before Osiris, before Horus, there was still death. And even then, people dressed it in meaning. Some graves from this era are more than simple pits. They show differentiation, status, richer goods here, simpler offerings there. Already, the machinery of hierarchy is assembling itself. Already, someone is deciding who deserves more in the afterlife. But it's not just social, it's architectural. Entire cemeteries arranged in rows, facing cardinal directions, echoing a kind of unspoken cosmography. No writing, no decree, just structure. And then, curiously, it all shifts. From Merimde to Nakada, we see increased sophistication, more craft specialization, more formalized burial practices, and a sudden obsession with certain symbols: boats, animals, eyes. We know what they mean in the dynastic context, but here they emerge from silence. No theology to explain them, just motifs, repeated like a dream someone can't quite shake. Was this the birth of Egypt, or the echo of something older? A blueprint carried in memory, not stone. Because what we find in these settlements is not a people discovering civilization. It's a people recovering it, reconstructing from fragments, rehearsing for eternity in clay and bone. And far across the sea, on an island floating in the eastern Mediterranean, another rehearsal was underway. No pharaohs, no pyramids. Just circular houses on terraced slopes, whispering of community and memory long before the Aegean had a name. The pre-ceramic Neolithic sites of Cyprus. Cyprus. On a low hill near the southern coast of Cyprus, overlooking a dry riverbed and the shimmer of the Mediterranean, sit the remains of Kirokisha ghost village of stacked stone and echo. But don't let its simplicity fool you. These are the ruins of a people who built in circles, lived in circles, and quite possibly thought in circles. This wasn't just a prehistoric village. It was an ideology laid in limestone. The site dates back to the pre-ceramic Neolithic, a time before pottery, before writing, before the idea of a city had hardened into reality. Yet what you find here looks suspiciously organized. Circular houses, built with stone foundations and mud brick superstructures, cluster along narrow lanes. Each dwelling is its own world, some with hearths, some with benches, some with plastered floors and post holes for wooden roofing. And they didn't just build these homes, they rebuilt them, again and again, on the same foundations, over generations. The repetition is almost ritualistic, as if each family was preserving a physical memory, a looping inheritance of space and identity. And then there's the burial practice. People were buried beneath the floors of their homes, literally underfoot. Adults, children, sometimes multiple individuals in a single grave pit. Bodies curled into fetal positions, cradled in the shadow of daily life. The living walked over the dead, slept above them, ate beside them. Memory wasn't just inherited, Herit was occupied. The entire village was encircled by a wall. Defensive? Perhaps. But there's no evidence of warfare, no arrowheads, no signs of assault. The wall may have served as a boundary of identity, a psychological ring, a way of saying, we are this. A circle drawn around a thought, a culture choosing enclosure not out of fear, but belief. What makes Tiya and its neighboring sites so remarkable is not what they lacked: metal, pottery, temples, but what they already had: social cohesion, shared ritual. A complex built environment organized not by randomness, but by memory. And yet, it all disappears. By around 6000 BCE, the site is abandoned. No disaster, no violence. Just silence, as if the circle finally closed and no one needed to remain inside it. But the circular house, it turns out, wasn't unique. Half a world away, in a cave etched with handprints and ritual fire, other families were drawing boundaries too. Not in stone, but in pigment. Not around houses, but around themselves. Red hands on black walls, reaching from a world we still don't fully recognize. The Cave of the Hands, Cueva de las Manos. Structures, Argentina. In the canyon of the Pinturas River, deep in the wind-beaten vastness of Argentine Patagonia, a cliff face breathes with ghosts. Cueva de las Manos, Cave of the Hands, is famous for its stenciled silhouettes, hundreds of them, painted in reds, blacks, ochres, and whites. Fingers splayed, palms pressed, outlines left like prehistoric signatures, human echoes sealed in pigment. But behind the gallery of hands, behind the art, is something older and less understood. The cave itself and the surrounding rock shelters, modified and arranged with a kind of quiet intelligence that suggests more than just habitation, it suggests structure. The cave isn't just a canvas, it's an architectural choice. Narrow, curving, naturally protective, but subtly enhanced. Evidence shows selective clearing of interior spaces, manipulation of light sources, and even rudimentary partitioning, using stacked stones and organic barriers. Fire pits are deliberately placed in acoustically resonant corners. Light, sound, and smoke converge in patterns too consistent to be casual. This wasn't just a place to live. It was a place to perform something. Something intimate, maybe sacred, certainly coordinated. The famous handprints over 9,000 years older only the most visible layer. There are also hunting scenes, geometric figures, and enigmatic zigzag motifs. The site's upper galleries contain fewer images, but more signs of occupation: ash layers, tool remains, butchered bones. There are floors worn smooth by generations of feet, niches carved into stone, possibly for storage or offerings. Again, the emphasis is not just on survival, but spatial memory. Certain walls are marked, others left bare. Certain zones echo, others muffle. The cave is shaped into a language of use. Why hands? Why hundreds of them? Most are left hands, meaning the artist held the pigment sprayer blown through bone pipes with the right. Many are layered, almost superimposed, like updates in a collective diary. They cluster in places that catch the last light of the day. Some, overlap in hypnotic spirals. Others float alone, no name, no face, just the repeated insistence. I was here, I reached, I touched. And around the cave, dotting the cliffs and rock shelters, are other sites less adorned, but structurally similar. Shelters shaped with the same logic, hidden, yet deliberate. As if a network once stretched across the landscape, marked not by walls but by echoes and pigment and absence. Across the Atlantic, where glaciers once retreated and forests crept north, other builders placed stones with that same reverence, not in caves, but on open ground, among fog and birch trees, in lands where the sun barely rises. They built houses for the dead, wide and flat and silent. The dolmens of southern Sweden. Sweden? Amid the forests and farmlands of southern Sweden, where mist clings to birch trunks and the landscape seems allergic to straight lines, the dolmens emerge like fossilized thoughts. Broad, low, and heavy. These Neolithic tombsif, they were tombsit in clearings and on hills, half sunken into the soil like stone memories that refuse to fade. They're not decorative. They're not dramatic. They're deliberate. Massive capstones balanced on upright slabs, forming chambers that feel less like rooms and more like punctuation periods at the end of sentences we no longer understand. Sweden is scattered with them, but it's the southern region, Skåne and Halland especially, where these dolmens gather in unusual density, always oriented, always shaped with intent. Some are solitary, some grouped in clusters that echo the rhythm of ancient kinship or ritual function. And while many are partially ruined, broken by frost or plundered for their stones in the medieval era, enough remain intact to provoke the same questions that cling to every megalith on Earth. Who built this? And what exactly were they trying to contain or keep out? The accepted theory is that these are early chambered graves built around 3,500 BCE. Bones have been found in some, in others, just pottery shards and flint tools. A few are eerily empty. But it's the architecture that refuses to behave. The capstones often weigh several tons, yet were somehow lifted and placed without metal tools, wheels, or beasts of burden. The joints are tight. The alignment is curious. Many dolmens face southeast, toward the rising sun. Not universally, but enough to ruin coincidence. And there's more. In some cases, the dolmens seem to have been part of larger ritual landscapes. Stone rows, cairns, and earthen mounds accompany them, like notes in a forgotten symphony. The builders didn't just stack rocks. They constructed meaning, territory, legacy. They built places designed to outlive names. Local legends, predictably, have tried to explain them. Troll houses, giant graves, portals to the underworld. Some dolmens are called jättestugan, giants' cottages. Others bear names of ancient kings no historian can confirm. The stories shift, but the stones do not. And across the sea, on a smaller island steeped in mist and myth, the same impulse continued. Low cairns, stone chambers, circular alignments under heather and silence. As if a memory had drifted across the North Sea and reassembled itself, this time in miniature, this time more hidden, but no less enduring. The cairns of the Isle of Man. Isle of Man. Set in the middle of the Irish Sea like a forgotten coin, the Isle of Man is a place where everything feels older than it should, benames, hills, even the wind. And scattered across this lonely island are cairns and burial mounds that predate its legends, its kings, and possibly even its language. Not flashy like Stonehenge, not vast like Newgrange, but quieter. More compact, more unnerving. These cairns sit hunched in the landscape like memories too heavy to stand upright. There are dozens of them, some simpler rock piles with no obvious entrance. Others, more elaborate, containing hidden chambers, passageways aligned to the solstice sun, or concentric rings of stone suggesting ceremonial use. Most are hard to date precisely, but many are confidently Neolithic, built over 5,000 years ago, at a time when farming had just begun, and the line between shelter and shrine was still being drawn. The island's most famous prehistoric site, Mail Hill, contains 12 burial chambers arranged in pairs around a central axis, like the spokes of some cosmic wheel. Each chamber is constructed with flat stones and faces outward, as though watching in every direction at once. Inside, the bones of multiple individuals were found burials over time, shared and reused. A family of the dead, sealed together by stone and silence. But Mail is just the best known. Across the island in windswept ridges, hidden behind hedgerows, buried under farmlandly lesser-known cairns that no one visits. Cairns without names, without plaques, without stories. Some have been plundered or collapsed, others remain sealed, their entrances, if they ever had any, long lost. And yet, they still mark something, a presence, a refusal to vanish. What makes the Isle of Man's cairns particularly eerie is their consistency. The same construction methods, the same shapes, repeated across centuries. No obvious signs of cultural interruption. Just generation after generation maintaining the same architectural vocabulary as if reciting a prayer no one dared to rewrite. There are legends, of course. The island is soaked in them. They say the fairies live in the hills, that the dead do not sleep, only wait. That the stones were once people punished for forgetting the old ways. Maybe those stories came later to fill the silence. Or maybe the silence was the story all along. And farther away, in a place where rain falls like ash and the rocks turn red with iron, stones rise again, but not to bury, not to worship, to signal, to gesture wildly into the desert void, as if hoping anything is still out there to see. The stone structures of AlUla, Saudi Arabia. Out in the vast, scorching isolation of northwestern Arabia, where the horizon flattens into an ocean of stone and silence, lies a landscape that should be empty but isn't. Instead, it is littered with thousands of ancient stone structures, etched into the desert floor with such scale and precision that they weren't even fully noticed until satellite imagery revealed them. Some are straight lines, others are rectangular enclosures. Many are shaped like keys, kites, pendants. They cluster, overlap, sprawl across hundreds of kilometers. This is AlUla, land of forgotten architecture. Among the most enigmatic are the mustadals-long rectangular stone enclosures, some stretching over 600 meters, built from rough stones stacked without mortar. At first glance, they seem like livestock corrals. But there are problems with that theory. The entrances are narrow or non-existent. Many show no signs of use or modification. And inside, some of them, archaeologists have found altars, offerings, animal skulls arranged deliberately as if these weren't pens, but temples. Or something like temples. Then there are the desert kits-fast funnel-shaped walls leading to enclosures. They're believed to have been used for mass animal hunts, guiding herds into traps. But even this explanation feels insufficient. The labor required to build one, let alone 1,000 shints at a level of social coordination we rarely attribute to Neolithic desert dwellers. These weren't scattered bands of pastoralists. They were engineers, coordinators, architects of ritual and control. The pendant-shaped tombs come next, long tails of stones trailing from circular mounds. Some lie alone, others form vast necropolises. They are often found on high ground, visible from miles away, deliberate placements, monuments for the dead, or maybe warnings for the living. What ties all these structures together is not just their variety, but their age. Some date back over 7,000 years, predating the pyramids, predating writing, predating civilization as we like to define it. And yet here they are, covering a desert once greener, once wetter, once alive with movement, built not for shelter or defense, but for purpose, a purpose we no longer understand. No inscriptions, no language, just stone lines, stone walls, stone circles. as if some ancient people decided to write their story directly into the earth, in a language of geometry and scale. And across the water, in a mountainous island in the Mediterranean, that same impulse took a more human shape. Stones stood again, but now with faces, with arms, watching. Not gods, not men, something in between, still standing, still unresolved. The standing stones of Corsica, France. Corsica is a land of granite and grudges, a jagged island rising out of the Mediterranean like the back of something old and half asleep. It is wild, forested, mountain-thousand in scattered places, disturbingly human, because hidden among the scrub and pine, where modern villages yield to ancient silence, stand the menhirs of Corsica. Standing stones, tall and slender, sometimes weathered smooth, sometimes carved with faces and weapons and what can only be described as permanent accusation. They are rarely in the guidebooks. The tourists come for Napoleon's birthhouse and the beaches. Few of them find their way to Filitosa, Palaju, or the lesser-known stone fields inland. Fewer still ask why these stones were shaped like people, or if they were always meant to be people at all. Corsica's standing stones are peculiar. Some are unworked rough monoliths stuck in the ground, pointing nowhere in particular. Others, especially those from the southern sites, are anthropomorphic, stylized faces, crossed arms, sword belts carved in relief, eyes that never blink, lips that never move. It is this strange semi-humanness that makes them so unsettling. They're not statues in the traditional sense. They're not trying to be portraits. They're trying to be something else. Archaeologists tie them to the Taurian culture, a Bronze Age society whose ruins scatter the island like breadcrumbs with no loaf. The Taurians are associated with stone tower story, and these figures may have been guardians, or ancestors, or threats. Some theories suggest the statues commemorate fallen warriors. Others, that they were warnings, intruders from the sea, carved and planted in the earth as eternal trophies. But then something odd happens. At a certain point in Corsican prehistory, many of these carved menhirs are deliberately defaced, their faces shattered, their bodies broken. Some are reused as building material in later structures. A cultural shift, a conquest, a ritualized act of forgetting. Whatever the cause, the stones that once stood proudly are now scattered, silent, half buried in time. And yet the alignments remain. Many of the sites feature careful orientation stones facing east, rows that track the solstices, layouts that echo star patterns. Even in destruction, purpose lingers. It's a kind of memory. Corsica seems to specialize in jagged, partial, unyielding. And on another northern island colder, darker, ringed in surf and isolation, this same half-memory appears again. Not in carved figures, but in ship-like graves and quiet megaliths where the dead were buried in fleets of stone. The megalithic graves of Gotland, Sweden. Gotland floats in the middle of the Baltic Sea like a misplaced secret closer to myth than mainland. Windswept, low-lying, and scattered with sheep, it seems an unlikely place for grand mystery. But beneath the island's mossy fields and pastures lies one of the densest concentrations of prehistoric graves in northern Europe. Not simple pits, not random burials, but megalithic graves, arranged in strange shapestone ships, cairns, and burial chambers that seem designed less for decay and more for navigation. You don't just bury someone in a stone ship unless you're trying to send them somewhere. Many of these ship settings are composed of long, narrow stones driven into the ground to form the outline of a boat, sometimes small, sometimes massive, with some stretching over 40 meters. Inside the stone perimeter lie cremated remains, flint tools, ceramics, and sometimes animal bones, gifts for the journey, perhaps. The imagery is unmistakable. The dead are sailing, not sleeping, to where no one agrees. The graves date back to the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, roughly 1,800–500 BCE, but Gotland's burial tradition stretches even further. Earlier chambered tomb cairns and dolmens dot the coastline and interior, suggesting continuous use of sacred space. The megalithic tradition here doesn't evolve so much as reiterate, repeating patterns with subtle variation, like a song learned by ear and passed through generations until meaning blurs into rhythm. There's also a strange continuity in location. Many of these graves are found near the coast, facing the sea. Others are aligned with celestial events, particularly solstices and equinoxes. Some contain standing stones at either end, like masts marking a symbolic voyage. Scholars debate whether this points to sun worship, ancestor veneration, or something else entirely. But what's clear is that death was not passive here. It was movement. It was direction. And then there's the unnerving possibility that these formations weren't just symbolic. That some were used ritually, not only for burial, but for reenactment ceremonial processions along the ship's length, seasonal rites where the living played at passage, mimicking the journey they knew they'd one day take. Today, the stones remain. Most stand alone in the grass, unmarked, unsupervised, exposed to rain and sea wind. Tourists pass them by, assuming them to be sheep pens or Viking leftovers. But they're older, stranger. They were built when the Baltic was a different sea, and time flowed in circles. And farther north, among islands more battered by wind and myth, those circles tighten. The cairns there are harder to reach. Fewer have names. None pretend to explain themselves. The cairns of the Shetland Islands, Scotland. Far above mainland Scotland, where the wind never stops and the sea eats at the land with salt-crusted teeth, the Shetland Islands lie like fragments of a world that refuse to disappear politely. It is here, on these remote and largely treeless islands, that prehistoric cairns burial mounds of stone, earth, and intention dot the heather-clad hills and sea-facing cliffs. They are often unmarked, frequently unstudied, but always deliberate. At first, they might seem like nothing just lumpy rises in the ground, disguised as nature, but dig a little metaphorically or otherwise, and you'll find chambered tombs beneath, corbelled roofs. Long, narrow passageways aligned with light. A place for the dead that says more about the living than any surviving text ever could. Many of the Shetland cairns date to the Neolithic and Bronze Age, possibly as far back as 4000 BCE, and yet they're staggeringly underdocumented. Compared to Orkney, their better-known cousin to the south, Shetland's prehistoric legacy is quieter, less reconstructed, less tourist-friendly, more raw. The UNST cairns, for example, sit on windswept hilltops where the skies collapse into ocean, and time is something that happens only to other people. Some are surrounded by stone circles. Others form part of complex landscapes where burial, ritual, and astronomy blur into one indistinguishable function. It's not just where these cairns are that's strange, it's where they're not. Some are built in impossible places, on exposed ridges where no one would want to live. Others hide in coastal inlets where the light disappears early, and the mist moves like a herd. These were not practical locations. They were meaningful ones. Places chosen not for ease, but for effect a horizon view, a solstice alignment, or perhaps to be seen from the sea. Inside, the cairns tell fragmentary stories: burnt bone, broken pottery, seal bones, whale vertebrae. Offerings not just of sustenance, but of symbol items chosen to travel with the dead or to bind them to the island itself. And when the bones disappear from the record, the stones remain. Watching, marking, occupying land with no explanation but shape. Even local lore is shy about them. Few Shetlanders tell stories about the cairns. It's as if they're too old for memory, too still for myth. They simply are. And to the south, where altitude replaces latitude, and the air grows thinner, a different kind of tomb towers above the land. not buried beneath it, not hidden in it. Built for height, built for sight, built to last, cylindrical monuments for the wind and the dead. The chulpas of the Altiplano, Bolivia, Peru. High in the windswept solitude of the Andean Altiplano, where oxygen is thin and the sky feels a few inches too close, the dead are not buried. They are housed. Scattered across this bleak, majestic plateau are towering stone structures known as chulpas, cylindrical funerary towers rising from the earth like fossilized smokestacks. They belong to no single culture. The Aymara used them, the Inca repurposed them, but their origin reaches further back, into the pre-Inca murk, where cultures left stones but not names. You find them in clusters, often on hills overlooking water lakes, rivers, or dry riverbeds that once ran fuller. Each tower stands apart, solitary but not alone, facing east to greet the sun. The architecture is deceptively simple, a tapered cylinder built of stone blocks, often dry, fitted with uncanny precision. Some are only a few meters high, others loom like forgotten chimneys to nowhere. Most contain a single opening, usually at the base, barely large enough for a person to crawl through. Inside, the bodies, often mummified, were placed in fetal positions, surrounded by offerings, textiles, ceramics, food, tools. Whole families were sometimes interred together, turning the chulpa into a kind of ancestral vault. The dead were not locked away, they were installed, as if expected to continue participating. And perhaps they did. What makes the chulpas so haunting is not just their design, but their persistence. They dot the landscape like stone antennae, transmitting some forgotten signal across centuries. Some are eroded, others partially collapsed, but many remain perfectly upright, their original mortarless joins still tight despite relentless wind and seismic unrest. They are watchers, positioned to observe whether the sun, the land, or each other is still unclear. And there are outliers. Some chulpas deviate from the normelliptical bases, polygonal blocks, unfamiliar carvings. Were these earlier prototypes, later imitations, or remnants of a parallel funerary language that never got translated? Modern visitors rarely stumble across the more remote towers. Some are unreachable without local guides, others are hidden entirely, overgrown or eroded into anonymity. The ones that are known still keep their secrets. No texts, no dates, just the insistence of form, circular, vertical, enduring. And as you descend from the Altiplano into the rugged folds of the Caucasus Mountains, the circles return, but this time, not as towers, as horizons. Rings of stone laid on the ground, astronomical in intention, inexplicable in presence. A message not from the dead, but perhaps to the stars. The stone circles of the Caucasus Mountains, Armenia, Georgia. In the bruised terrain where the Caucasus Mountains rear up like a cracked spine between Europe and Asia, something old waits in the grass, not hidden, just overlooked. Stone circles, scattered across high plateaus and forest clearings in Armenia and Georgia, lie like the skeletal blueprints of a forgotten cosmos, not cities, not tombs, not exactly. These formations resist identity, but they persist, like the mountain wind, and they do not apologize for being older than memory. The most striking is Zorat's Karar, often called Armenia's Stonehenge comparison that flatters England more than it clarifies the Caucasus. This site, also known as Karahunj, consists of dozens of upright stones, some reaching over 2 meters high, arranged in an elliptical configuration with radial arms branching outward. The stones are pierced with small circular holes, drilled near the tops, which many researchers believe align with key points in the night sky. Others scoff. But the alignments are their sunrise at the solstice, lunar standstills, possibly even stellar risings from epochs long past. But Zorat's Karar is not alone. All across this region, from the volcanic ridges of Syunik to the river valleys of Caucasus Malar, lesser-known circles lie dormant, Some are ringed cairns. Others are simple arrangements of standing stones. Some are half swallowed by moss, their symmetry disrupted by time, but not erased. And nearly all of them are located in places that feel chosen hilltops with unbroken views, crossroads of ancient footpaths, points where the landscape itself seems to inhale. Their purpose? Officially, no one knows. Theories bloom like weeds: ritual sites, solar observatories, communal gathering spots, prehistoric clocks, alien beacons. The stones themselves offer no answers. Most bear no markings, no inscriptions, just presence, weight, stillness. Local legend doesn't help much. In Armenia, some say the holes in the stones were for speaking to the stars, or for hearing the voices of gods. In Georgia, stories swirl of sacred circles where warriors once swore oaths, or where giants were buried upright, watching over the valleys they once ruled. What's clear is this: these weren't one-offs. They're part of a pattern not just within the Caucasus, but across the globe. A pattern of people who felt the need to mark the earth with circles, who lifted stones not to enclose or divide, but to align, to measure, to reach. And farther west, across the sea, on an island ruled by stones and silence, one such site lies beneath layers of history: Phoenician, Roman, Nuragic. But beneath it all is something older still. Something that was not built over, but around, as if the land itself had to respect it. The megalithic site of Monte Sarai, Sardinia, Italy. Perched above the plains of southwestern Sardinia, Monte Sarai wears its layers like scarce civilization, scratching its initials into the same high ground. The Phoenicians came first, then the Carthaginians, then the Romans. Each wave built, buried, repurposed. But underneath the shrines, fortifications, and domestic ruins lies a foundation no one fully claims. Not Phoenician, not Roman, older, stranger, underrated. It is a megalithic ghost, hidden in plain sight, and it hums with a kind of architectural resentment. Monte Sarai is known for its Punic settlement, a neatly organized grid of streets, sanctuaries, and cisterns. It makes sense on the surface. But below that, urban logic is a substratum of stone that doesn't match the later blueprints. Great, heavy blocks arranged with prehistoric indifference to symmetry, sections of wall that follow no cultural precedent. Terraces carved directly into the rock, showing wear long before the arrival of Mediterranean script. These aren't just reused materials. They're original intentions that survived the overwrite. Sardinia's better-known prehistoric marvels: the Nuragamassive beehive towers made of dry-laid stone found throughout the island. But at Monte Sarai, the story mutates. Instead of towers, we find outlines, enclosures, rock-cut chambers that feel more ritualistic than defensive. Some scholars suggest there was a megalithic village here before the Punic foundation, now buried beneath centuries of rational occupation. What exactly did the original builders intend? That's the question. There are no inscriptions, no statues, no bones, only shapes, pathways that suggest ceremonial roots. Hollowed stone basins whose function has outlived its name. A layout that seems to resist practicality in favor of pattern, not human logic, but something quieter, spatial, possibly astronomical. The Phoenicians built their necropolis on top of it. The Romans paved their roads across it. But the older plan always reasserts itself. You see it in the odd alignments. The corners that jut out just a little too far. The foundation stones that no later builder dared to move, as if to do so would be a kind of architectural heresy. Monte Sarai doesn't ask to be explained. It dares you to misunderstand it. And south of France, back in the darkness of another kind of gallery, there are no streets, no buildings, just wall sand, the things painted on them. Not ruins, but messages. Left for those who wouldn't arrive for another 10,000 years. And even then, Still too soon. The caves of Lascaux and Chauvet structures, France. Beneath the quiet forests and sleepy farmland of southern France, behind unremarkable hills and anonymous cliff faces, are caves that open not into shelter, but into memory. Lascaux and Chauvet, now whispered with reverence in the corridors of anthropology, hold some of the oldest known art in the world. But calling them art sites is a half-truth. These caves are not galleries. They are structured spaces shaped by ritual and fire and the obsessive compulsion to remember something too old to name. Lascaux, discovered in 1940, and Chauvet, unveiled in 1994, are both famous for their prehistoric murals. Horses, galloping in profile, mammoths floating mid-step, lions, aurochs, and rhinoceroses rendered with impossible elegance. But the real mystery is not the paint, it's the space, the way the caves were used, modified, entered, and re-entered. These weren't casual doodles, they were performances, installations, and the cave itself was the medium. In Lascaux, there are shafts too narrow for comfort that still bear painted walls, meaning someone chose to crawl into darkness, drag firelight with them, and draw in spaces no one would casually explore. In Chauvet, some walls show signs of preparation scraped flat to create a better canvas. Scaffolding holes are visible in higher galleries, suggesting that even tens of thousands of years ago, people engineered their environment to support a symbolic purpose. This is not survival. This is architecture. And it wasn't just visual. The acoustics of these caves are, frankly, unnatural. Some of the most heavily painted chambers amplify sound voices, drumming, footfalls. You could stand in total darkness and hear a ritual you could never see, or see the flickering light of a torch dancing across images that move as you move. Fire becomes animation, shadow becomes participation. There are no burials in these caves, no domestic waste, no signs of ordinary life. That in itself is a choice. These were sacred theaters, designed to transform the human experience as spaces constructed not from stone but from intention, and for millennia, they were sealed, hidden, preserved by accident or by design. When they were rediscovered, they deteriorated almost immediately. Mold crept in, carbon dioxide bloomed, as if the caves themselves were rejecting their return to the world. And across the ocean, in the soil of another forgotten continent, people built structures not into the walls, but from the earth itself, massive patterns too large to see from the ground, too precise to be accidents, and too silent to explain themselves. The earthworks of the Ohio River Valley, USA-specific small sites, stretching across the ancient floodplains and rolling woodlands of the American Midwest, far beyond the headlines of Serpent Mound or the tourist brochures of Cahokia, lie smaller, stranger earthworks raised mounds, geometric enclosures, and carefully sculpted ridges that appear in places no one expects and under names no one remembers. They're subtle, often mistaken for natural hills or old agricultural scars, but they're not natural. They are drawn into the land, often with a precision that still baffles surveyors, let alone historians. The Ohio River Valley is littered with these forgotten forms. Not just the big ceremonial centers, but an entire network of minor sites, no larger than a football field, others extending across acres-aligned, measured, leveled, circles, squares, octagons, parallel embankments running for miles with nothing between them, sites like Cedar Bank, Junction Group, and the obscure remnants in rural counties rarely visited. These aren't fragments of something bigger. They are the system. No one knows precisely who built them. The term Hopewell gets used as a cultural placeholder and umbrella for a tradition that spans from 100 BCE to 500 CE. But Hopewell was a 19th century farm name, not a people. What we have instead are fingerprints, artifacts of obsessive geometry, buried caches of mica, obsidian from far-off mountains, copper from the Great Lakes. Things that don't belong together, yet were deliberately gathered, curated, even and placed in mounds with astronomical alignments so subtle you need satellites to spot them. These aren't settlements. There are no houses, no signs of everyday life, and that's the most telling part. These earthworks weren't lived in. They were visited, measured, walked, used. For what, we still don't know. Ritual gatherings? Celestial observation? Territorial signaling? Some mounds line up with solstice sunrises. Others map lunar cycles that take 18.6 years to complete. That's not folklore, that's math. And still, there's no writing, no stone, just soil moved by hand, in quantities that would have required generations of labor. The builders did not leave their names, but they did leave their sense of order, written into dirt and elevation. These places aren't lost, they're overlooked, plowed under, fenced off, forgotten, but they remain. Like thoughts, the land is still thinking. And farther across the sea, on an island of monsoons and granite, another mystery lies buried not in hills, but in stone cut straight into bedrock, wells, perfectly vertical, deep and dry, dug not to quench thirst, but perhaps to speak with something deeper than water. The ancient rock wells of Sri Lanka. In the jungled heart of Sri Lanka, where vines creep over ruin and stone breathes slowly under centuries of moss, there are holes in the earth that shouldn't be there. Rock wells, some narrow and shaft-like, others broad and basin-shaped, carved straight into solid bedrock with a precision that feels surgical, indifferent to the limits of early tools or the patience of mortals. These wells go deep. They are uncannily smooth. And no one, not modern engineers, not local villagers, not even the devout monks who built their temples nearby can say exactly who dug them. They are often found near ancient ruins, sometimes Buddhist, sometimes pre-Buddhist, but they are not aligned to any particular religious plan. In fact, many of the oldest wells seem to predate the structures beside them. They pierce into the ground like questions no one has answered. Some are 30 or 40 feet deep, with perfect circular walls, and no obvious method of construction. There are no chisel marks, no seams, no debris left behind, just stone absent where it should be present. The standard theory is water, that these were cisterns, or stepwells, or reservoirs for arid seasons. But many of these rock wells are inexplicably dry, even in monsoon country. Dug in places where there is no clear aquifer to tap. Their depth is often excessive, their function vague. Some are completely sealed, others lead nowhere, as if they were abandoned mid-thought. There are patterns, wells grouped in ceremonial clusters, wells with carved rims indicating long-term use. In a few cases, inscriptions appear nearby Brahmi script, possibly early Sinhalabut, never on the wells themselves. It's as if the writing came later, as if the wells were already there when the scribes arrived. Local lore doesn't help much. Some say they were made by gods, or yaksha spirit subterranean beings known in Sri Lankan folklore as guardians of hidden treasures and forgotten truths. Others believe the wells are gates, not metaphorically, literally, portals to the underworld. Portals that were once used and then forgotten not because they failed, but because they worked too well. And far to the south, high in the mountains of a kingdom lost to time, another pattern emerges, not vertical this time, but circular again. Stone rings scattered across the highlands. Echoes of enclosure, echoes of something domestic or sacred or both, and old enough that even the shepherds have stopped asking where they came from. The stone circles of Lesotho. Tucked high in the Maloti Mountains, where clouds crouch low and the air tastes thin and ancient, the kingdom of Lesotho holds a secret beneath its grass. Scattered across the hillsides and ridges are stone, circle slow, crude walls of dry-laid rock, weathered by wind and snow, unmarked by history, and largely unmapped. They dot the highland plateaus like faded fingerprints. Most people don't even know they're there, including, it seems, the archaeologists. The circles vary in size. Some are barely 3 meters across. Others sprawl wide enough to contain small herds of animals or entire families. They are often grouped together, connected by faint traces of old footpaths or lines of smaller stones, like sentences in a language spoken through landscape. At first glance, they look like the remnants of livestock kraals or shepherd huts. But then you realize just how many there are, how remote, how uniform. Some scholars have argued they're from the Iron Age. Others suggest they date back further to pastoralist communities so early. Their cultural identity is more guesswork than fact. There's little consensus. The circles are not formally excavated, not catalogued in detail, not carbon dated with any serious consistency, but they remain high and silent, immovable. A few still show signs of modification: internal partitions, hearthstones, or embedded post holes hinting at timber supports now long gone. Yet many are just the circle itself, enclosure without a roof, a frame with no picture. They could be homes, or corrals, or shrines, or all three. Local oral tradition, sparse as it is, doesn't treat them as significant. The Basotho people, whose own architectural history is rich with stone and clay, seem largely indifferent to these circles. Perhaps because they are simply too old, too worn to attach story to, or perhaps because some memories get buried for a reason. What's more intriguing is their distribution. Some of these circles align loosely with astronomical marker solstices, cardinal points, mountain peaks that catch first light. Not all. Just enough to make the randomness feel suspicious. Just enough to imply intentionality. These were not huts built for survival. These were structures arranged for meaning, the kind of meaning that gets repeated, generation after generation, until the reason is forgotten but the action persists. And farther west, where the rivers fatten and the soil turns to wet clay, another ancient architecture rises, not circular this time, but piled, heaped, shaped by hands that worked with dirt instead of stone. Monuments, not of rock, but of earth. And they are everywhere, if you know where not to look. The pre-Columbian mounds of the Mississippi Delta, USA, specific small sites. In the low, humid sprawl of the Mississippi Delta, where land and water conspire to blur the boundaries of permanence, lies a landscape pocked with soft rises mounds that appear to be nothing at all. Covered in grass, folded into farmland, obscured by time and trees. But beneath those rises, something monumental sleeps, thousands of them. And while names like Cahokia and Poverty Point grab headlines, these smaller, often unnamed sites are the true chorus of a civilization that did not build in stone, but still built with a purpose sharp enough to pierce millennia. These mounds are found across Louisiana, Mississippi, and southern Arkansas, often tucked behind levees, near forgotten bayous, or rising unceremoniously behind convenience stores and cattle fields. Some are just a few feet high. Others stretch stories into the sky. Most have never been excavated. Some have been destroyed, flattened, plowed, repurposed, erased. But not all. They come in varied forms: conical burial mounds, flat-topped platform mounds, elongated ridges, and complex mound groups arranged in patterns visible only from above. What they lack in stone, they make up for in scale and distribution. Built basket by basket, handful by handful, these earthworks were engineered with astonishing labor and eerie precision. Some align with the solstices, others mirror the curves of nearby rivers or the positions of stars. And these aren't isolated anomalies. They're nodes in a dense network of ritual landscapes built by cultures often called woodland or Mississippian as placeholder terms that flatten complexity into museum labels. The truth is murkier. These were highly organized societies, trading across vast distances, manipulating their terrain with deep cultural logic. Their mounds weren't just graves or platforms. They were cosmological statement saxes between worlds, thresholds between sky, earth, and whatever came after. Many of these lesser-known mounds lack artifacts. No pottery, no bones, just shaped earth, untouched. That absence disturbs the archaeologist, but perhaps it's the point. Perhaps these were not for the dead, but for the living, or for something else entirely. And yet, even as they rise from wetlands and clay, these mounds echo something found an ocean away, another island, another civilization, another mound-builder culture. But here, in the Mediterranean, the stone returns, and with it, a shape less gentle than a dome, less welcoming than a circle, a tomb shaped like a giant's bed, waiting in the silence of Sardinia. Not for sleep, but for something older, something we still refuse to wake. The giants' graves of Sardinia, Italy. On the island of Sardinia, nestled between crumbling Mediterranean cliffs and the wild scrub of the Macchia, lie rows of stones that look like spines broad at the center, tapering at both ends, rising from the earth like the backs of beasts buried mid-roar. These are the giants' graves, Tombe dei Giganti prehistoric megalithic tombs, named not by scholars but by shepherds, who saw in them something too massive, too deliberate to belong to humans. And they weren't entirely wrong. Built by the mysterious Nuragic civilization, the giants' graves are unlike any other funerary structures in Europe. They are not circular like dolmens, nor pyramidal like barrows. They are elongated, some stretching over 30 meters in length, bounded by curved lines of stone slabs like ribs around a spine. At the head of each tomb stands a tall, central stelae, sometimes plain, sometimes carved with abstract motifs, or door-like shapes framing an entrance to a long, covered burial chamber. These chambers once held the remains of multiple individuals, sometimes dozens. The dead were interred together, often in seated or fetal positions, as if waiting for something. These were communal tombs, not single graves, suggesting that memory here was collective, and the line between identity and ancestry had already been erased. But it's not just the scale that disturbs, it's the ritual geometry. The tombs are often oriented toward celestial event solstices, equinoxes, moonrises, implying not just reverence for the dead, but an understanding of time that curved back on itself. The layout mimics womb-like enclosures, curving in on the body of the earth, making the grave not an end, but a return. And while the Nuragic people are known for their Nurag heconical stone towers, whose purpose remains debated, their graves are quieter, lower, more ambiguous. Some scholars have suggested the giants' graves doubled as ritual gathering spaces where the living communed with their dead in ceremonies that blurred the line between the sacred and the domestic. Others note the symbolic doorways carved into the central stela passages, not just to tombs, but perhaps to other worlds. The giant, of course, never shows up. He is the absence that makes the structure feel inhabited. And just to the east, where a great lake once swallowed whole valleys, the water has receded, but the ruins remain. Beneath the surface, entire villages lie drowned, not by myth or metaphor, but by rising tides and forgotten cataclysms. Their stones still rest on the lakebed, waiting for the world to come up for air. The sunken villages of Lake Malawi, Mozambique. In the rift-carved basin of East Africa, where tectonic forces have torn the earth open and filled the wound with water, lies Lake Malawi, a liquid mirror stretching over 500 kilometers long and deeper than the mountains that surround it. But beneath its surface something breathes, not fish, not myth, but stone, the drowned bones of ancient villages, now submerged and barely visible, like ghosts pressing their faces against glass from the other side. Along the lake's shifting shoreline, especially in the southern and eastern regions, archaeological evidence has emerged of sunken structures, stone foundations, walls, and possible hearths lying beneath the shallows. These aren't wreckage sites. These are settlements, entire communities built when the lake was smaller, its waters calmer, its reach less greedy. And then, something changed. The water rose, whether slowly or all at once, and the lake took the land back. Some of the submerged structures align eerily with modern fishing villages, as though they once stood on the same ground. Others lie far below, unreachable without diving gear, their outlines barely discernible through the murk. What remains is architectural memory. Aligned stones, enclosures, platform stew, consistent to be random, too precise to be natural. They speak of people who organize space, who plan their movements, who built with the confidence of permanence. But permanence doesn't exist around Lake Malawi. The region is a geological fault line, part of the East African Rift, where the earth moves in slow, irresistible ways. Over thousands of years, water levels have surged and retreated, swallowing valleys and exposing others. Civilizations grew, flourished, and vanished, sometimes without even a myth to remember them. Some researchers tie these sunken sites to early Iron Age settlements. Others suggest earlier habitation Neolithic or even late Paleolithic groups who made use of the region's abundant fish, fertile land, and rich stone. But there are no ruins in the classical sense, no carved gods, no royal tombs, just the imprint of dwelling the rhythm of domestic life suspended beneath water and silt. Local fishermen tell stories of villages under the lake, of drums that can still be heard from beneath the waves on quiet nights, of lights that flicker where there should be none, but no one dives down to check. Some places are meant to stay drowned. And across the sea, where sandstone cliffs rise above tangled jungle, another kind of shelter whispers through Timano, buried, but hidden in plain sight. Painted, carved, and lived in for so long that even the rock seems to remember. The rock shelters of Pakmarhi, India. Deep within the crumpled sandstone hills of Madhya Pradesh, where the jungle exhales mist and monkeys howl through ancient groves, the Pakmarhi Plateau holds secrets in the rock. Not temples, not towers but shelters, dozens of them. Rock-cut hollows, naturally formed and subtly modified, carved and painted and used for millennia. At first glance, they seem modest overhangs and shallow caves, shaded by sal trees. But step closer, and the walls begin to speak, not in language, in symbol, in silence. The Pakmarhi rock shelters are best known for their vibrant prehistoric paintings, humanoid figures in red and white ochre, elephants and deer caught mid-motion, battle scenes and tribal dances, myths frozen in mineral breath. But beyond the art lies architecture not of walls and roofs, but of curated space. These shelters weren't just used, they were shaped. Deliberately selected and altered to suit some now-lost combination of ritual, habitation, and memory. The shelters vary in size. Some can fit a handful of people, others echo with enough space for entire gatherings. Evidence of hearths, tool use, and repeated occupation suggest long-term, even seasonal return. Certain shelters appear to have been reserved for ceremonial purpose, paintings, arranged not randomly, but hierarchically, often positioned above eye level, sometimes repainted over generations in the same spots. This isn't art as pastime. This is architecture of the unseen. These walls weren't decorated. They were addressed. Many of the images depict hunting scenes, animals, and dances, but others defy immediate interpretation. Geometric shapes, tridents, crosses, serpent-like curves, motifs repeated across multiple shelters, always with slight variation, as if improvising around a spiritual grammar. The placement of these symbols, often at the entrance or apex of a shelter's curve, suggests an awareness not just of vision but of liminal thresholds, the precise space where inside becomes outside, where shelter becomes shrine. And these shelters were not isolated. They formed clusters, often connected by narrow trails or natural sightlines, creating what can only be described as a network of sacred geography. A landscape inscribed with meaning, stitched together by repetition and return. Locals still speak of spirits in the hills, of echoes that don't belong to animals, of shelters best avoided after dark. And while the jungle has reclaimed much, the stone refuses to forget. Far out in the sea, though, where islands rise from limestone like fossilized waves, another network waits, not painted, but carved, not sacred, but sunken. Hidden chambers beneath the earth, built not for the living, not quite for the dead, but for something else entirely. The underground chambers of Hal Saflieni, Malta. Beneath the unassuming town of Paola, Malta, behind the hum of buses and the quiet chaos of daily life, is a hole in the ground. It doesn't look like much. A door, a staircase, a bureaucratic gate. But once descended, it gives way to something that feels older than the dark itself, a prehistoric labyrinth carved entirely by hand, deep within limestone. This is the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni. But what few realize is that it's not alone. It's simply the one that survived the surface. The hypogeum, dated to around 4000 BCE, is the most famous of Malta's subterranean monuments, a multi-level necropolis with chambers, corridors, and altars that defy any notion of primitive design. The walls curve smoothly. The acoustics are unnatural. A whisper can travel from one end to another without losing strength. One room, the so-called oracle chamber, resonates at exactly 111 Hz, a frequency later linked to trance states and altered consciousness. Coincidence? Maybe. But then again, what part of this place feels accidental? And yet, the lesser-known truth is that Malta may be riddled with similar underground structures, sealed, collapsed, or erased beneath centuries of occupation. Archaeological hints abound: odd sinkholes, sunken passages, rock-cut features beneath newer buildings. Local rumors tell of tunnels that once connected prehistoric temples like Manajdra and Ayar underground shrines now lost. Some believe Hal Saflieni is just the tip of a vast ritual network, with other chambers deliberately hidden or destroyed to keep something in or out. What was it used for? Officially, a necropolis. Over 7,000 human remains were found in its deeper levels. But the structure suggests something more than burial. Certain chambers contain no bones at all, only altars and carvings. The orientation of passages and shafts suggests celestial alignments, beams of light that once entered specific points during equinoxes or solstices, despite the structure being entirely underground, a tomb that marks time, a temple that silences breath. The deeper you descend, the stranger it becomes. The walls grow smoother, the carvings subtler. One chamber features a perfectly formed trilithon facade, carved into solid rock imitating above-ground architecture, in a place where no one was meant to see it. And across the sea, in lands fractured by ocean and scattered by empire, similar stones risen not in darkness, but in open fields, standing alone, facing no one, watching skies no longer charted, as if the builders were waiting for something to return or never quite left. The megalithic structures of the Philippines. Across the humid archipelago of the Philippines, where rainforest, volcano, and ocean continuously blur the boundaries of permanence, lie whispers of a past that refuses to be catalogued. Not golden temples or grand palaces, stones, old ones, standing upright or stacked, scattered across remote islands and forested hillsides, megalithic structures that shouldn't exist if you believe the dominant narrative of isolated tribal evolution, but they do, and they do not explain themselves. From the Batanes Islands in the far north to the highlands of Mindanao in the south, There are stones soon inscribed, unmapped, and mostly ignored. Some appear in fields as solitary monoliths, others in circular arrangements or clustered atop ridgelines that offer no strategic advantage. A few have been incorporated into local folklore agents' teeth, petrified lovers, ancient guardians, but most are nameless, rooted in silence, weathered into near invisibility. A particularly curious site exists in southern Mindoro, where enormous boulders are found balanced, deliberately, in unnatural positions supported only at small contact points, as if placed by hands that didn't care about gravity. Some form crude dolmens, with capstones resting atop upright slabs, while others stand alone, oriented toward unseen markers. The local Mangyan communities pass down vague stories about spirits and ancestors, but even their traditions taper off into uncertainty. No one remembers building these. Everyone assumes someone else did. The stones are not decorative. There are no carvings, no art, but there is placementa, kind of deliberate spatial logic that repeats across different regions, despite linguistic and cultural differences. In the highlands of Ifugao, terraced mountains hold more than rice fields. They conceal rock walls and possible ritual enclosures far older than the terraces themselves, often buried beneath soil and myth. Structures that suggest a tradition of megalithic manipulation predating even the most conservative estimates of Austronesian settlement. Mainstream archaeology has barely touched these anomalies. Funding goes elsewhere. Context is hard to establish. And without carbon-datable materials, most of these megaliths are treated as natural oddities or incidental stone scatter. But that's a story we tell to avoid a harder question. What if these weren't local traditions at all but fragments of something larger? Something maritime, migratory, ancient enough to have forgotten its own name. And eastward, clinging to the bones of the same islands, a different structure unfurls, this time alive with green, tiered with intent, carved into mountains like steps toward the sky. Not stone circles, not tombs, but terraces, whose roots twist deeper than the legends that claim them. The ancient terraces of Ifugao, Philippines. High in the Cordillera Mountains of northern Luzon, where clouds bleed into soil and altitude distorts time, the rice terraces of Ifugao climb the slopes like living architecture. They are immense, carved into the hillsides with an elegance that mocks modern machinery, stone by stone, tier by tier, until the mountains look like staircases for forgotten gods. Locals call them the eighth wonder of the world. UNESCO agrees. But beneath the applause lies a mystery. How old are they really? And who were they for? Conventional narratives peg their construction to roughly 2,000 years ago, credited to the ancestors of the Ifugao people, whose cultural and agricultural mastery is beyond dispute. But some researchers now whisper what older generations suspected all along, that parts of the terraces may be much older, that they predate the Ifugao, perhaps by millennia. That the stone retaining walls and irrigation systems follow a pattern not entirely consistent with surviving oral histories. That these weren't just farms but monuments. Sculpted landscapes, imbued with a kind of sacred geometry we no longer recognize. The terraces stretch across thousands of hectares, manipulating topography with subtle genius. Their channels redirect mountain springs into slow-moving veins of water, nourishing rice paddies so precisely arranged that even satellite images struggle to capture their scale. In some places, terrace walls reach 10 feet high, built from boulders meticulously locked into place, no mortar, no room for error. And yet they stand, season after season, like the bones of the mountain itself. But here's where it gets strange. In the older, less tended parts of the network far, from tourist trails, some terraces appear misaligned with current water systems. Others are found above usable irrigation levels, suggesting they were either built in a wetter climate or served a different purpose altogether. Some scholars argue these may have begun not as agricultural tools, but as ritual, spacious, stage-like constructions for ancestor veneration, celestial observation, or even burial rites. The Ifugao people, known for their rich oral traditions, speak of these terraces as inherited. They maintain them, honor them, but few claim to remember building them from scratch. It's a stewardship, not a creation. And so the mountains remain carved, shaped by intent we can no longer translate. Crops grow, tourists marvel, but the terraces watch. And farther west, across a continent turning back to sand, another kind of wall stretches through a different silence, not built for crops or for kings, but for something no one dares name. A wall without enemies, a structure without answers, and it goes on for miles. The stone walls of the Sahara, Morocco, Algeria. Beneath the sun-shattered sky of the Western Sahara, where dunes drift like time itself and the wind carves stories into the dust, there are walls. They stretch across empty valleys and vanish into ridgelines, sometimes for kilometers, always without explanation. These are not fortifications. They guard nothing. They circle no cities, defend no temples, enclose no fields. And yet there they are, stone walls, dry-stacked and half-buried, wandering across the desert like the footprints of someone too large to see. The walls differ in form. Some run in long straight lines that defy topography, slicing across open plains as if following instructions written on another layer of the earth. Others zigzag or loop, forming closed shapes whose meanings have long since turned to sand. They are low, rarely higher than a person's waist but wide, solid, ancient, built without mortar, yet still standing. Sometimes they interconnect. Sometimes they stop abruptly, as though the builders simply walked away mid-sentence. Archaeologists have offered guesses. Some say these were animal corrals used by Neolithic herders to trap gazelles or manage livestock. Others propose they were property markers, boundaries in a land where territory meant survival. But neither explanation satisfies. The scale is too vast, the effort too immense, and the logic behind their placement where no water flows, where no known settlements lie, refuses to comply. In certain regions, the walls align with geological features or celestial events, following the shadows of ancient volcanoes or pointing toward equinox sunsets. This has led some to wonder if these were not enclosures at all, but markers, ritual paths, processional routes, or maps laid flat upon the earth for someone or something to read from above. There's no definitive dating. Some may be 2,000 years old, others 5,000, 10? The desert doesn't volunteer that kind of information. Local oral traditions are thin. Most ignore the walls entirely, treating them as part of the land. Some Tuareg legends speak of a time before the sand, when the stones were alive and walked on their own. Others mention the builders who never slept, figures that came before the tribes, before even the stars had settled into their proper places. And far to the east, in a different desert, stone takes another shape, not walls, not enclosures, but tombs, thousands of them, beehive-shaped and scattered across cliffs and valleys, left behind by a people who seemed to bury more than they built, who made the land itself their cemetery, and left no message but the shape of their absence. The cairns and tombs of the Arabian Peninsula, Oman, UAE. In the skeletal highlands and endless gravel plains of Oman and the United Arab Emirates, where wind grinds stone into silence and time curls into heat mirages, stand thousands of tombs, beehive-shaped cairns, and dry-stacked stone enclosures, perched atop desolate ridges and clustered in forgotten wadis. They stretch across the horizon like vertebrae of an extinct civilization, their uniformity almost unnatural. These are not remnants of kings or empires. These are monuments of persistence, built in a time before writing, before Islam, before history even pretended to take notice. Some call them the Hafit tombs, after the Jebel Hafit mountain range where they were first documented, but similar structures scatter across the wider region, Bat al-Ain, Wadi al-Hilo, and other nameless places. They date as far back as 3,200 BCE, yet they still stand, sun-blasted and stark, as if defying the erosion of both stone and story. Each tomb is a rough cylinder, carefully constructed from stacked, flat stones, no mortar, no decoration. Many are single-chambered, built to house one or two individuals, often buried in fetal position, facing the rising sun. Others are larger, multi-chambered, possibly reused or designed for family groups, but there's no centralized necropolis, no sprawling city of the dead. Instead, these tombs perch individually, sometimes in eerie lines along mountain spines, as if mapping something we've long forgotten, a celestial itinerary perhaps, or a path for the souls to walk home. What's missing from these landscapes is often more disturbing than what remains. No known settlements nearby, no temples, no inscriptions. Occasionally, fragments of pottery or bronze tools emerge, but rarely in a context that explains much. The builders appear to have lived light, leaving behind death monuments that outlived everything else about them. A civilization that spoke through cairns and vanished through silence. And it's not just Oman or the UAE. Similar tombs stretch into Saudi Arabia, Yemen, even parts of Jordan, architecturally related, spiritually familiar, but still unclaimed by any coherent origin. It's as if the Arabian Peninsula once hosted a network of ritual deathways, a map drawn not in ink but in stone, threading its way across deserts like veins under skin. And to the south, in a land now fractured by war and wind, the same instinct emerges, but stranger. Not just tombs, not just walls, but stone giants, massive figures laid flat, or standing half-formed in the wilderness, untouched, unstudied, and unwelcoming. Whatever they were meant to guard, they are still guarding it. The sleeping giants of Yemen. Yemen. In the harsh, dust-colored interior of Yemen, where mountains rise like broken teeth, and the desert exhales ruin, there are stones that shouldn't be there. Not natural boulders, not ruins in the traditional sense, but strange, monolithic arrangements, massive, isolated blocks aligned just so, or clustered into suggestive forms that whisper of limbs, faces, torsos. Locals call them sleeping giants, because they look like something caught mid-movement, fallen or resting, half submerged in time, as if frozen in a moment too long ago to measure. These formations don't belong to any known cultural layer. They are rarely mapped, never signposted, and often omitted entirely from archaeological surveys, largely due to the danger of access. Civil war, sectarian fragmentation, and political instability have made much of Yemen invisible to inquiry, which, perversely, has allowed some of its oldest secrets to remain intact, unexploited, undisturbed, unexplained. Descriptions are inconsistent because so few have seen them up close. Some speak of enormous upright stones arranged in rows, each carved with deeply weathered anthropomorphic features, oversized heads, abstracted limbs, arms pressed to sides. Others tell of figures lying flat, sunken into the earth, legs stretched toward the horizon as though beginning to rise, but forgetting how. Some are surrounded by stone circles, others are solitary. All are too large to have been moved casually, too heavy to be incidental. No one agrees on their age. Some say they're pre-Sabaean, older than the great kingdoms that built Yemen's cliffside cities and irrigated its desert valleys. Others believe they are Neolithic, remnants of a symbolic system erased by conquest and climate. A few go further, suggesting they are not statues, but burial effigies, markers of mythic ancestors or gods too large to be housed in tombs. Not monuments to death, but to suspension, to waiting. There are no inscriptions, no writing, no context, just scale and silence, and a deep, gnawing sense that these structures weren't made to be seen from the ground. They were made to be seen from above. Nearby tribes rarely speak of them. When they do, It's with a mixture of reverence and caution. They call them watchers, sleepers, anchors. The stories contradict. But one detail repeats: they are not dead, just resting. And just beyond the sea, on smaller islands with names softer than their stones, a different story sleeps temples without gods, built not by hands in search of conquest, but by a people seeking symmetry beneath the stars, hidden, humble, and almost forgotten. The pre-Nuragic temples of Malta's sister islands, Malta, Gozo, and Comino. Malta is already infamous among mystery seekers for its ancient megalithic temples, Ajar, Kim, Menajdra, Tarxian monuments, so old they make the Egyptian pyramids look like teenagers. But what often goes overlooked are the smaller, stranger, and less studied ruins on Malta's sister islands, Gozo and Comino. These are not grand temple complexes. They are fragments, outliers, echoes but no less potent. In some cases, they may even be older. On Gozo, the Gigantija temples get most of the attention, two megalithic structures dating to around 3600 BCE, supposedly named for the giants who were said to have built them. But the island hides other, less theatrical remainstone alignments, scattered blocks in overgrown ravines, low walls with no clear function, foundations with no buildings. Temple plans interrupted mid-dream. Some of these lie on private land, others lost in bureaucratic obscurity. They are rarely excavated, sometimes acknowledged, never explained. Comino, even smaller and more remote, is often dismissed entirely, just a rocky stepping stone between its two larger siblings. But scattered among its scrub and crags are stones that defy accident, single-standing megaliths, curving low walls built without mortar, circular depressions that resemble other known temple forecourts. There are no signs, no fences, no plaques, just a growing suspicion among a few quiet researchers that Comino once mattered more than it does now. These temple remnants, whether half-built, half-erased, or fully buried, follow a similar architectural language to their mainland counterparts. Elliptical plans, forecourts leading into trilithon entrances, interior altars flanked by niches, and, most strikingly, an obsession with celestial alignment. The same orientation to solstices and equinoxes, the same interplay between stone and light, the same architectural choreography of time made visible. But why build temples on these islands at all? They're isolated, difficult to access, and small enough that the practical value seems negligible, unless the point wasn't population, it was location. A node in a sacred geography, a pivot between sky and sea, a mirror of something celestial. No one knows what happened to the builders. The temples were sealed intentionally, as if the final act of faith was burial not of bodies, but of meaning, and the stone was left to speak for itself. Now, far to the south, where the savanna spills into the ocean and memory erodes slower than stone, another field of circles emerges, less symmetrical, less famous, but no less defiant, built by no one, known by none, and still standing, because someone once needed them to. The stone circles of the Eastern Cape, South Africa. In the wind-swept grasslands of South Africa's Eastern Cape, where the hills roll like ancient waves and the sky feels a touch too big, stone circles lie scattered like the punctuation of a forgotten story. Not famous, not fenced, not even mapped in full. These are not the dramatic monoliths of Europe, nor the intricate funerary towers of the Andes. These are humbler, rougher low rings of stone, some so faint they seem to flicker between real and imagined. But they're there, in the fields, on the ridges, whispering, often overshadowed by the more publicized and controversial site known as Adam's Calendar in Mpumalanga. The stone circles of the Eastern Cape have avoided the limelight altogether. That may be their greatest protection. What we find here are structures made from locally sourced rocks, placed with intention, generally in circular or elliptical formations. Some enclose nothing but earth and time. Others contain low cairns, raised platforms, or internal partitions, like the faded blueprint of something once deeply understood. These circles are often found in clusters, scattered across hillsides with no apparent pattern. But step back, zoom out, and something emerges. A quiet rhythm. A repetition of form and orientation that hints at ritual landscapes, not just shelters. Most archaeologists will say they're the remnants of pastoralist settlements, the collapsed walls of livestock enclosures or temporary kraals used by early Bantu-speaking communities. And that's probably partly true, but only partly. Because the oldest of these circles, the ones that lie farthest from rivers, highest on the hills, farthest from what we would call practical land, don't look like herding enclosures. They look ceremonial, directional. Many have narrow openings pointing east, or alignments with mountain peaks and seasonal sunrise points. Some contain smaller inner circles nested like thoughts within thoughts. And none of them, even the most ruinous, feel accidental. Local communities have long avoided building directly atop these stones, not out of respect, but caution. The circles, they say, belong to the people before, the ones who vanished, the ancestors of no one, or of everyone. And there are stories of lights on the hills, of sounds without speakers, of cattle that won't cross certain ridges. There are no signs, no plaques, just stone and grass, pretending to be nothing. And just north of here, where cliffs rise and tombs bloom from vertical rock, the dead are once again tucked, not beneath the earth, but into its face, carved out like forgotten doors. And some are still waiting to be opened. The rock-cut tombs of Lycia, Turkey. Along the jagged coastlines of ancient Lycia, modern-day southern Turkey cliffs loom like sleeping giants. And carved directly into their faces, often hundreds of feet above the ground, are the yawning mouths of rock-cut tombs. They seem impossible, gravity-defying. Dozens upon dozens of intricately chiseled facades, mimicking wooden architecture and stone, staring blankly out over turquoise seas and pine-covered slopes. The tombs of Lycia are among the most visually striking mortuary structures in the ancient world, and yet, what lies beneath them before them remains shrouded in absence. Most tourists know the famous tombs in Myra, where the cliff wall reads like a stone apartment complex for the dead. They might recognize the so-called house tombs, or the monumental tomb of Amyntas in Fethiye, with its fluted columns and defiant elevation. These are the visible Lycian tombs, dating roughly from the 5th century BCE. They wear Greek influence like a borrowed robe language, iconography, the occasional god carved into a pediment. But dig deeper literally and chronologically and things become murkier. There are older tombs, sometimes barely carved, their features more abstract, almost geometric. Some are less refined, more eroded, buried beneath their more famous successors. And a few sites feature rock-cut chambers in locations that make no ceremonial or strategic sense, high, remote, inaccessible, facing no path, no sea, no sun. Why build tombs there? For whom? And how? Some scholars suggest these earlier tombs may predate the Lycians themselves, who arrived in the region during the early Iron Age. That they may have been adapted or overwritten by later civilizations, folded into a cultural continuity that buried origin beneath adaptation. There are no inscriptions in these oldest tombs, no grave goods, no names, just dark openings in ancient stone, like eyes that have seen too much. Even the architectural style wooden motifs carved in stone raises questions. Did it originate in timber construction long since lost? Or is it symbolic, a metaphorical evocation of houses for the dead? And if symbolic, what belief system demanded that symbolism? No definitive texts survive. The Lycian language itself was only partially deciphered. The meaning, like the burial rites, remains elusive. And beyond these cliffs, across an ocean and centuries away, another island tells a quieter version of the same story where stones lie not stacked in grandeur, but scattered in sheer number. Not one or two, but tens of thousands, each marking a presence with no clear voice. The dolmens of Jeju Island, South Korea. On the volcanic island of Jeju, where black basalt cliffs drop into the frothing sea and mist coils around the dormant Halasan volcano, an unsettling pattern emerges: stone tables, scattered across the landscape, quietly enduring. Locals know them, farmers plow around them, tourists ignore them. But archaeologists estimate there are over 10,000 dolmens on Jeju alone, making it one of the densest concentrations of megalithic structures in the world. And yet, no one can quite explain why they're there, or who exactly put them there, or what they were really for. Dolmens, or goindol in Korean, are usually defined as burial structures, large flat capstones balanced atop upright stones, creating what looks like a massive stone altar or a lidless sarcophagus. On Jeju, however, many dolmens don't even follow the basic script. Some are collapsed, with capstones resting on the ground like abandoned shields. Others are built with impossible precision, their construction belying tools that shouldn't have existed in that era. Some are completely buried, with only the top visible. Others stand alone, sentinel-like, with no signs of bones or burial chambers at all. Their distribution defies logic. They're found on steep hillsides, in rice paddies, embedded into the very fabric of rural, lifelike ancient punctuation marks no one knows how to read anymore. Unlike mainland Korea, where dolmens are often arranged in clusters or necropolises, Jeju's dolmens feel more like a scattered code, an island-wide network left by a people more concerned with position than convenience. Local legends suggest that giants placed the stones, or gods, or the ancient Jeju shamans, who once ruled the island's spiritual domain before organized religion arrived to flatten things out. Some stones are still considered sacred, offerings are left, stories are told quietly, and only when prompted. But most of the island has simply absorbed the mystery, treating these megaliths as natural as windbreak walls or lava tubes. Strangely, a few dolmens align with celestial events, particularly equinox sunrises, but no consistent pattern has been established, which leaves a possibility both tantalizing and terrifying. What if each dolmen wasn't part of a system, but a message individual, site-specific, locationally coded in a way we've forgotten how to interpret? And then, thousands of miles away, on a continent covered in forests and freshwater seas, we find another anomaly, this time in the form of absence, not structures standing, but holes in the earth, where something once lived, and where entire civilizations may have dug deep into stone not to build monuments, but to mine the impossible. The ancient copper mines of the Great Lakes, USA, Canada. Scattered along the windswept shores and forested ridges of the Great Lakes, especially around Isle Royale and the Keweenaw Peninsula, lie pits, thousands of them. Not sinkholes, not natural caves, but human-made copper mines, dug long before the arrival of European colonists, long before even the known Native American copper-using cultures flourished. These mines are deep, methodical, and strangely precise. They are, in effect, industrially prehistoric, and that contradiction has left generations of archaeologists and mystery seekers scrambling. At least 5,000 ancient mine pits have been identified across the region, and likely many more remain hidden beneath forests or lakes. Most of them are filled in now, either by time or erosion, but some have been excavated. What they reveal is astonishing. Tons of copper extracted using primitive tool hammerstones, antler picks, and fire-setting techniques. Wood used to brace mine walls has been carbon dated as far back as 6,000 years ago. That's older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, and nobody knows who did it, or where the copper went. What's even more unnerving is the scale. Conservative estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of pounds of copper were removed from these ancient mines. And yet, very little of it has ever been found in archaeological contexts across North America. A handful of artifacts here and there, beads, small tools, decorative items, but nothing approaching the massive output the mines imply. Which raises a chilling question: where did it all go? Was it traded across the continent and melted down? Lost? Or, if you ask, the fringe theorists exported across oceans to cultures we aren't supposed to believe ever reached these shores? Mainstream archaeologists attribute the mining to archaic period peoples native to the region, suggesting a long and slow accumulation of effort. But the deeper you look into the mine shafts, the harder that explanation is to swallow. The uniformity, the engineering, the scale. This wasn't opportunistic scavenging, it was a project. Local indigenous groups, like the Ojibwe, have oral traditions that speak of copper as sacred, offered to the water spirits, not hoarded. They acknowledge the old pits, but don't claim them. Some stories even hint at people before people, an older race, or an older memory, that came and vanished beneath the pines. And far away, across a different sea, on a quieter island soaked in moss and myth, other stones wait. Not carved, not buried, but raised in rings, deliberate, watchful, and facing everything and nothing at once. The stone rings of the Isle of Arran, Scotland. Off the western coast of Scotland, where the wind scrapes the sea raw and the hills brood beneath perennially gray skies, lies the Isle of Arran place, the ancients once called the Scotland in miniature. And maybe they were right. Arran is a condensed epic, crammed with geological violence, ancient memory, and a silence so thick it feels ritualistic. But more than that, it's a stone-bound riddle. Scattered across its fields and moorlands are prehistoric ringstone circles, standing stones, cairns, each one older than the nation that now forgets them. Arran doesn't have the grandeur of Orkney or the tourist sheen of Stonehenge. What it has instead is raw intention. There are over a dozen known stone circles on the island, some nearly intact, others half swallowed by peat and grass. The most famous is Machrie Moor, a strange open expanse littered with concentric stone rings, solitary monoliths, and bizarre alignments that make no sense until the light changes. Then suddenly, the stones snap into place, casting shadows, catching sunrises, aiming their ancient silence towards something we can't quite see anymore. Some of these circles are made from sandstone, soft and red, worn smooth by centuries of wind. Others use granite, dark and brooding. One stone has vertical grooves, as if clawed by fingers far too large to be human. Others stand in pairs, like sentinels left behind by a departing army of the dead. Beneath the surface, archaeologists have found burial cists, urns, and charcoal traces of fire, death, and intention. And yet, they don't feel like tombs. Not primarily. They feel like something else. Calendars, altars, antennas. The rings are often aligned with mountain peaks, solstice sunrises, or distant notches in the landscape features, only visible if you already knew what you were looking for. That suggests planning across generations. Or knowledge passed down through means we no longer recognize. Some circles are elliptical, others are distorted. A few seem to have been edited, with stones added or removed long after the original construction, as though each era tried to make sense of them in its own confused dialect. And local folklore? Eerily consistent. The stones are often called giants, maidens, or watchers. In one tale, they are dancers turned to stone for defying the Sabbath. In another, they are the graves of a forgotten people cursed by the sea. And speaking of sea and curse, farther south on the same island chain, the stone obsession doesn't fade, it multiplies. Not in neat circles, but in lines and rows, across a granite moor where the dead and the stars once spoke the same language. The megalithic alignments of Dartmoor, England. In the windswept highlands of Dartmoor, England's granite heart, the earth rises and buckles like an old battlefield, quiet now, but haunted. Here, on this bleak, open moor, beneath skies that never quite clear, lie hundreds of megalithic structures, often passed over in favor of their flashier cousins Stonehenge, Avebury, Carnac. But Dartmoor doesn't shout, it mutters, and what it mutters is far stranger. The moor is littered with stone rows, cairns, standing stones, and kistvans, stone burial boxes, scattered like the broken notes of a lost symphony. Some alignments stretch for over 2 kilometers, narrow avenues of upright stones marching across bog and hill, often ending in a solitary menhir or cairn. Others twist or meander, leading nowhere obvious. There are over 70 known stone rows on Dartmoor, more than anywhere else in Britain. Most are now neglected, half collapsed, buried, or ignored as local curiosities. But they persist, inexplicably. What were they for? No one really knows. Some archaeologists posit processional way ceremonial paths walked during rites long since extinguished. Others believe they functioned as astronomical calendars, aligned with solstices or lunar standstills. A few theorists go further, proposing that the alignments correspond to sound frequencies across the moor's geology, using the granite like a resonant instrument. It's all theory, because there are no inscriptions, no carvings, no myths that explain the blueprints, just stones, stubbornly in place. And then there are the cairnsman-made mounds of stone, often circular, sometimes containing cremated remains, sometimes nothing at all. Their distribution is equally maddening, clustered in some areas, solitary in others. They sit atop hills, cling to slopes, or squat in valleys, marking something we've forgotten how to measure. Time? Spirit? Territory? They guard their silence well. Dartmoor's weather only adds to the mystery. Fog arrives quickly here, swallowing visibility and reshaping perception. 1 minute, you see a single stone. The next, a whole alignment materializes like a conjuration. Orientation becomes disoriented, directions bend, the landscape folds in on itself, and you are suddenly part of the riddle. Local legends whisper of stone dancers, cursed processions, invisible paths, places where clocks don't work, stones that move, groves that vanish, but no one speaks too loudly. And further across the Atlantic, in a jungle that once held gods and games, the stone rises again, not in circles or rows, but in layers, steps, and plazas, hiding beneath what we think we know. A ruin with a ruin inside it, and beneath that, perhaps something we were never meant to find. The El Tajín precursor structures, Mexico. Tucked within the thick, humid jungles of Veracruz, Mexico, stands the archaeological site of El Tajina Mesoamerican City, famous for its stepped pyramids, intricate reliefs, and the haunting Pyramid of the Niches, where 365 recesses are carved with impossible precision. But beneath the grandeur and symmetry of this classic Veracruz city lies something older, something less ornate, but far stranger, a substructure, or more accurately, a set of precursor constructions that don't quite belong to the Tajín we think we know. El Tajín, as it appears now, flourished between the 9th and 13th centuries CE. That's the textbook story. But dig literally, and a different narrative begins to crack through the limestone. Beneath the main pyramids are buried foundations, distinct from the architectural style that defines Tajín. The stonework is cruder, the layout doesn't follow the same sacred geometry. And some of it seems to have been repurposed, used as the base for newer temples, as if the builders didn't entirely understand what they were inheriting, or didn't care to ask. This isn't uncommon in Mesoamerica, but here, the contradiction is more pronounced. These substructures are partially exposed, partially entombed, caught in a transitional moment between total erasure and reluctant preservation. Some of the walls show scorch marks. Others are collapsed inward, suggesting deliberate dismantling. And beneath it all, ceramic shards and figurines emerge, objects that don't match the classic Veracruz iconography, but instead point toward Olmec influence, or perhaps something pre-Olmec entirely. But here's where it gets stranger. The deepest layer, still largely unexcavated, contains stone alignments and platforms that face directions out of sync with the later city. They don't point toward the rising sun or Venus, as would be expected. Instead, they angle awkwardly, as if obeying a forgotten cosmologia, different sky, a different god, or perhaps a different pole. Local Totonac legends speak of Tajin as the place of invisible thunder, where the gods themselves played games with time. Some stories say the city was not built, but found already half standing, hidden by jungle and silence. Others say it was destroyed not by war, but by hubris people digging too deep, uncovering stones not meant to be moved. And half a world away, on a continent long ignored in ancient timelines, water whispers through man-made channels carved not with war in mind, but with patience. Giant webs of traps, walls, and flows, designed not to imprison people or gods, but fish, though their true purpose, like everything else on this list, remains slippery. The ancient weir systems of Australia. In the shadowy valleys and wide floodplains of southeastern Australia, where rivers meander like lazy myths and eucalyptus trees crack in the sun, lie the remnants of an infrastructure so old, so intricately woven into the land, that it was long mistaken for natural formations. These are the ancient weir systems of Australia: stone fish traps, channels, and aquatic mazes constructed by indigenous Australians, not in recent centuries, but possibly thousands of years ago. And the deeper you look, the more that narrative warps. The most well-known example is Brewarina in New South Wales, a site that stretches across the Barwon River like a prehistoric net of stone. Curving channels guide fish into traps, basins hold the catch. Some parts of the system are still visible today when the water's low, but they represent only a fraction of what once existed. Aboriginal traditions assert the site was created by ancestral beings during the dreaming, which of course is often dismissed as myth. Yet when carbon dating was attempted on charcoal remains from nearby camps, the timeline bent backward possibly over 30,000 years. And that's just Brewarina. Similar structures have been discovered, mostly ignored, in Victoria, Queensland, and South Australia. Dry-stacked stones arranged in deliberate looping patterns. Complex hydrological systems that rerouted rivers without dams or violence. Unlike the brutal straight lines of colonial engineering, these systems worked with the river, bending its flow subtly, in ways modern hydrologists are still trying to fully understand. Some channels even shift seasonally, not despite the environment, but because of it. The purpose? Ostensibly fish shields, in particular. But this was never just about food. These places were sites of gathering, ceremony, and trade, drawing groups from hundreds of kilometers away. They were the social and spiritual hubs of ancient Australia. And yet, for most of colonial history, they were labeled curiosities, or worse, dismissed as accidental. How could hunter-gatherers build infrastructure? That was the assumption, until it wasn't. No formal blueprints, no written records. Just knowledge passed through song, smoke, and shadow. Much of that knowledge was severed by displacement and policy, but the stones remain, stubborn and wet, still catching fish in places no one watches anymore. And in another desert, a dead one this time, the stones turned vertical again, not flowing with water, but fixed in stillness. A ruined city, or maybe a cloister, a graveyard, or a ritual site. A settlement clinging to the edge of meaning, somewhere between scroll and silence, somewhere near Qumran, the city of the dead of Qumran, West Bank. On the western edge of the Dead Sea, where salt gathers in the bones of the earth and the wind smells faintly of ash and old miracles, sits the ruin of Qumrana Place, best known for the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. But those parchment fragments of law, prophecy, and apocalypse only scratch the surface. Surrounding the caves, sunken into silence, is a site that defies its labels. Not quite a city, not quite a monastery, and far from just a footnote in biblical scholarship. It's been called a settlement, a fortified outpost, even a communal Essene compound. But if you walk it slowly, stone by stone, it feels like something else entirely. A city of the dead that refuses to decay. The architecture is sparse, pragmatic, and disturbingly enigmatic. Rooms arranged with mathematical precision, cisterns cut deep into limestone, aqueducts guiding water through a place where life shouldn't thrive. Some claim it was a center for ritual purity, obsessively washing away the world. Others suggest it was a scriptural think tank, a desert cloister where scribes transcribed holy texts into eternity. But then, there are the bones. Graves, hundreds of them, lie to the east, neatly aligned, deeply dug, unadorned, male skeletons, almost exclusively, no offerings, no monuments, just bodies beneath rock and salt, arranged as if awaiting instructions. And, oddly enough, some are buried in ways that contradict traditional Jewish burial customs. Face down, limbs twisted, as though the interments were less about honoring the dead than containing them. Beneath one building, archaeologists found a ritual bath, or mikveh, with steps leading into silence, and remnants of ash and pottery sherds mixed with animal bones. Sacrifice? Cleansing? Refuse from sacred feasts? Or a symbolic death rehearsed, repeated, perfected? Then there's the scroll cave mystery. The documents themselves were found in nearby caves, not in the site proper. Why? Why hide them there out of reach, out of view? Were the scrolls protected from outsiders, or from those within? Was Qumran the vault, or the crime scene? Some say the site was abandoned suddenly. Others insist it was never meant to last, but only to wait, a temporary station for a people anticipating the end, a staging ground for apocalypse. Or perhaps, for memory. And on another volcanic isle, surrounded not by deserts but by endless waves, that memory hardens into stone once more, not in scrolls or graves, but in the very land itself, where platforms and foundations whisper through volcanic ash, unseen beneath the watchful eyes of giants. The stone structures of Easter Island's interior, Chile. Everyone knows the moai, those brooding, stoic faces that line the coasts of Rapa Nui, staring out across the South Pacific like stone prophets, waiting for an answer that will never come. But while the world obsesses over these coastal sentinels and their stone platforms, it largely forgets what lies inland. The island's interior hilly, overgrown, eerily quietus, scattered with stone foundations, walls, enclosures, and buried ceremonial spaces that rarely make it into the brochures. These are the quiet remains, not statues, not showpieces, but signs of a once expansive infrastructure built beneath the surface story. The island's volcanic terrain is pocked with stone-paved roads, aligned not randomly but with purpose, many leading directly to the Ahu, others spiraling deeper into the hills toward places where no moai ever stood. Along these roads are rock walls, often low and thick, enclosing areas that appear to be habitation sites, agricultural plots, or ceremonial zones. Some are layered with stone platforms, flat, rectangular slabs that may once have supported structures long since vanished. There is no wood left, no thatch, just outlines, ghosts with geometry. Archaeologists have identified structures that defy simple classification: elliptical enclosures without doors, stone-lined pits, and even buried chambers with no clear access points. Some are filled with smooth, water-worn stones. Others contain fragments of tools, bone, or obsidian artifacts of utility and ritual muddled together. They hint at domestic life, yes, but also at something more esoteric, more structured. These weren't just huts. They were nodes in a network, part of a social order that seems to have stretched across the entire island before it collapsed into legend. And the spatial logic of these interior sites doesn't always match practical needs. Some dwellings are placed on inhospitable ridges. Some align with solar paths or lunar cycles. Others are oriented towards specific ahu on the costas, if mimicking a cosmic architecture with volcanic stone. Rapa Nui wasn't just a settlement, it was a ritual landscape, one whose meaning is mostly sediment now. And then there are the moai themselves, hundreds, still abandoned mid-journey, lying prone in the island's quarries and pathways, as if the system had collapsed mid-process, as if the builders stopped not because they failed but because something told them to stop. Beyond the coastlines and across the mountains of the Andes, other stone towers, wait not statues, not homes, but hollow cylinders reaching skyward like chimneys for souls, built to house the dead or to let something out. The Pre-Inca chulpas of Sillustani's less visited sites, Peru. In the high-altitude desolation around Lake Umayo, near Puno in southern Peru, the wind doesn't blow, it gnaws. And through that endless howling air stand the chulpas, massive, cylindrical funerary towers, some over 40 feet tall, built with such clean stonework they make nearby colonial ruins look like sandbox castles. The Sillustani site is the most famous, perched dramatically on a peninsula, ringed by water and sky. Tourists come, take photos, and leave. But they rarely ask the deeper question: who built the first ones? And why do they feel older than they should? Because Sillustani isn't the whole story. Scattered far beyond the tourist paths on remote ridges, high plains, and unnamed knolls are other chulpas. Less symmetrical, often collapsed, but still aligned, still deliberate. These outliers are less refined than the later Inca versions. Their stones are rougher, their mortar less consistent. But they follow the same strange blueprint. Circular towers, often single-roomed, with small rectangular entrances facing east toward the rising sun, or perhaps the place where spirits once re-entered the world. The official explanation is that the chulpas were used by the Kola people, a pre-Inca Aymara-speaking culture absorbed into the Inca Empire in the 15th century, and that's partially true. The Incas did use these towers, possibly even co-opted and improved upon the style. But many of the most remote towers appear far older, untouched by imperial engineering, buried beneath centuries of disuse, and located in places that no expanding polity would find practical. They weren't made to be seen. They were made to anchor something vertical. Some chulpas feature stones carved with serpents, pumas, and lizards, symbols tied to Andean cosmology. Others have false door-small carved recesses that go nowhere. Were they symbolic portals for the dead? Or placeholders for something that never came? And still others contain no remains at all. Local legends speak of the chulpas as places not of rest, but of containment, where spirits, restless, powerful, or simply unwelcome, were kept sealed inside. Stories tell of towers that sing in the night wind, of bones that don't stay buried, of watchers built not to honor the dead, but to keep the living away. And across the ocean, at the mouth of another ancient river, a very different kind of structure rises not from stone, but from earth itself. Vast, geometric mounds and patterned soil, holding the echoes of a culture that shaped the land like language and then disappeared without a single word. The earthworks of the Marahora culture, Brazil. Where the Amazon River meets the Atlantic, the landscape transforms no longer a jungle, not quite a delta, but something in between. Marajo Island, a vast, flooded expanse the size of Switzerland, sits like a forgotten punctuation mark at the end of a sentence too long to remember. It's here, beneath layers of mud, forest, and academic neglect, that the traces of the Marahora culture have begun to re-emerge. And what they left behind is not a crumbled temple or lost city, but the land itself reshaped, raised, and patterned with a geometry that defies the chaos of floodplain living. The earthworks of Marajo are vast, deliberate constructions, mounds, causeways, and canals, many of them stretching for hundreds of meters. Some are arranged in spirals. Others form platforms, plazas, and rectilinear outlines that seem to echo urban planning on a scale far more sophisticated than previously admitted for pre-Columbian Amazonia. These are not incidental. They were build-shaped, basket by basket, shovel by shovel, by a society that understood the rhythms of water and time in a way we've long forgotten. For centuries, scholars believed the Amazon basin too poor in nutrients to support large, complex societies. The myth of the pristine wilderness, untouched by human hands, persisted. But the Marajoara ruins undermine that fiction. Radiocarbon dating places many of these earthworks as early as 400 CE, possibly earlier, and the people who built them didn't just survive the Amazon. They engineered it. Atop the mounds, archaeologists have found exquisite ceramics, boldly painted urns, sculpted funeral vessels, and intricate figurines with geometric patterns that repeat across distances. Beneath the surface, they've unearthed signs of burial practices, elaborate feasting, and complex social organization. These weren't scattered tribes. This was a culture with symbolic logic, aesthetic discipline, and infrastructural vision, a civilization that quite literally rose above the flood. But here's the unsettling part. The Marajoara disappeared. Their mounds remained, their pottery was buried, their city, plans blurred back into jungle and swamp. There are no surviving oral traditions, no direct descendants who claim their story. It's as if the earthworks were meant to outlive memory itself, the final act of a people who didn't vanish, but who covered their tracks on purpose. And as the jungle breathes them back into view, you have to wonder how many others are still buried beneath our feet. How many stories, carefully constructed and then erased, are quietly waiting to rise. Because this was just the 53rd structure, and we haven't even begun to explain the flood.